All right, everybody. How you doing? It's News Debate. I am Lee. Great to have you with me on the show, live on Twitter Spaces, live on stereo, sending video to twitch.tv/NEWZ debate and rumble.com/user/NEWZ debate. Joined over here on rather on Twitter Spaces by patreon.com/NEWZ debate supporter apostate Nate. Say hello, Nate. How you doing?
Hey Lee, good to see you. What's the news story that has your attention today?
Well, it's all about the community, Nate. It's all about the community. Do you have a story that you would like to discuss?
I feel like we have to get on this weird ballroom installation. It's funding, it's construction. I feel like there's something to be said here. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, that's on the list today. Let me pull up an article. While I'm doing that, give me your thoughts.
I think the biggest question that I have from this right now is should you be allowed to modify public property just because you're rich? I think that's what it really comes down to. Everyone's saying it's Donald's own money that he's using, and that's fine. I mean, I have financial resources. They ain't great, but I could probably try to take those resources and, modify a public building, replace a door. I don't know. You figure out, yeah, it's nice that you have that, but you can't really do that. And I wonder if the same is true for the White House. Like, who has the authority to change the architecture of our most important buildings? I mean, we have laws for everything else. I can't imagine that we don't have some kind of a legal precedent for who is allowed to change a public structure and why. I don't know, Lee. To me, I guess I don't care that he's doing it. Um, but I think his supporters are missing, like, does he have the right to do this? If he has the right, does this even make any sense? How's this going to make the party look years down the road? Is that room going to become something of joy, or is it going to become something to scorn? Got a lot of thoughts buzzing about it today, Lee.
Yeah, good questions. I actually didn't realize he was using his own money. So let's read up on some of these facts and we'll continue the hot takes. So I'm looking now on the New York Times video going out to twitch.tv/NEWZ debate and rumble.com/user/NEWZ debate. Also want to say hi to John and Mr. G over on stereo. Go ahead and leave us some voice messages either on our survey over on stereo or whatever we're talking about currently on the show. We'll probably cover a bunch of different topics. The survey over on the show on stereo, I went with something I did recently. I wanted to see if people's minds had changed at all. So Dems are to blame for the shutdown or Republicans are to blame for the shutdown. Right now it's about 50-50. My vote is still for the Democrats. They are the dissenters here. The Republicans have almost enough power to push it through, but they do not. And the Dems are the one who are ruining it for everybody. I don't think they're going to win what they want. And it just continues to keep the government shut down. I have a story up here. Maybe we'll talk a little bit later, but food aid. So EBT food stamps, those are going to stop next month as the government shutdown continues, and I think the Democrats are directly to blame. But let's go back to this East Wing of the White House, looking at the New York Times. A White House ballroom has been on President Trump's wish list for years. Now, he has demolished the East Wing of the White House to build one, a 90,000 square foot, $300 million endeavor, which is the largest renovation to the White House in decades. So to go back to Apostate Nate's point, this has happened before. The White House is different than when it was first built. It's been changed quite a lot. You can look up some historical photos. So I would say the president can kind of do what he wants. Well, up to now, what they want. Damn, shows the wrong words. It's 2025. What they want within reason, like not demolish the White House, but if a president wants to go in there and put up solar panels and then take them down, I forget who put them up, but George W. Bush took them down. So maybe it was Clinton put them up, if I'm getting the presidents right here, but someone put them up and then the next president took them down. That's all in their purview. Usually they don't knock down an entire wing of the White House, but I would say, all right, that's fine. I don't even know that it has to be their money, but let's get to some of those details. Mr. Trump initially pledged that the White House would not be touched by the construction of a new ballroom. And of course, this is very Trump like. You cannot trust anything he says. So, very Trump esque here. But as heavy machinery bulldozed the East Wing, it became clear. As soon as it was demolished, it was clear that one of the nation's iconic buildings was getting a bigger makeover with virtually no discussion. The New York Times talked to 7 voters across the country to see what they thought of the project. Their answers reflect the political divide. A retired Navy commander and Republican was pleased with Mr. Trump's efforts to remake the East Wing. It made sense on several levels, he says, because Trump and future presidents will now have more space to have receptions. I got to say, that makes sense. I can see the benefit of a ballroom for the White House, I got to say. Another plus, he says, was that the new construction allows for new security measures that could defend against modern war technology. I'm not sure about that. Certainly, they could build it stronger than the parts that were built earlier. I didn't think about that. I'm not sure it's necessary. I don't think the White House is going to get hit by a bazooka or a missile, the type of stuff that maybe you could try to work against with new construction. I don't know if I buy that, but technically the new construction could be stronger. Okay, fair enough. A 36-year-old Democrat once visited the White House as a child. George W. Bush was president at the time, and the man remembers feeling proud to be an American as he walked through the hollowed halls. But he says now we're desecrating a part of history that we should have been celebrating. The ballroom doesn't seem necessary to him. Instead, he sees it as a vanity project. All right, so those are 2 of the 7. And we can get to more details. It doesn't say here about the money, but we can look that up really quickly. So, Nate, why don't you give me more of your thoughts and maybe your feedback on the 2 people we've just heard from the New York Times while I try to locate some of those details. I didn't know about the money, so I'm interested about that.
Yeah, Lee, it is a vanity project. I guess Trump gets kind of a pass on that because he's not putting it on the taxpayer to do. With any project that big, I do wonder, is there any angle in which a taxpayer, is going to be on the hook for this thing? This is a massive project. And I can't remember if you touched on it just now, because I have a terrifically bad short-term memory. But I think Trump said that he wasn't going to tamper with the existing structure of the White House. Then the headline hits and the East Wing's gone. Math that for me.
No, that was part of it. He definitely said at first it wasn't going to be demolished or whatever the wording is. But clearly it was. So you can't trust anything that he says. Let's jump over here to stereo really quickly and see if any of these messages make sense. They're kind of short, which makes me think maybe they're not useful. But let's hear from Jonathan on stereo.
GOP is definitely to blame for this fuckery. Is Kefrenria think he the king? He out for like for real.
So that's some AI there. All right, let's hear from Grady on stereo.
Actually, my friend, Republicans have all the power, and the only reason why they don't have enough votes is because there are certain people that are preventing them from getting their way, which would hinder America even more than it's already hindered. which will cause, reputable damage to our children in the long run. I do not agree with your assessment on Democrats being the problem when they're literally the ones that are losing the count each time. These bills that the Republicans come up with are pushed in.
Let's hear that again. I lost some of that at the end. Let's hear from Grady Ray one more time.
Actually, my friend, the Republicans have all the power, and the only reason why they don't have enough votes is because there are certain people that are preventing them from getting their way, which would hinder America even more than it's already hindered, which will cause, damage to our children in the long run. I do not agree with your assessment on Democrats being the problem when they're literally the ones that are losing the count each time when these bills that the Republicans come up with are pushed in.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that accountant's time comment reflects. Feel free to leave another one to let me know what you mean by that. I mean, I understand different perspectives. We've talked about it on the show. Republicans are to blame, Democrats are to blame. I pick the Democrats because I don't think they're going to win, which means that just strategically, why would you shut down the government if you're not going to win? Now, you could disagree with that, but that's one of my logical assumptions here is that they're not going to win, so the shutdown just hurts everyone. To go to your point about, well, the reason that the Republicans can't just push this through and keep the government funded is because, to paraphrase, I think you're saying, people are trying to protect us. These are bad ideas. Okay, I can understand that perspective. Sure. I'm a Democrat, so I totally identify with that perspective. But when you have a vote and the vast majority of people are saying yes, and then you have a few people who are saying no, and that prevents it from going forward and that shuts down the government, the minority, the far minority here, the Democrats are the stinkers. They're the ones that are holding it up. So once again, if you think that they're justified, I can understand that. If you think they're going to win, I disagree with you, but okay, I understand that too. I'm not a Republican. I just see this as the Republicans are in power. They have the vast majority here. You're not going to win, so you're just hurting people. We can get to this a little bit later in the show, but food stamps, EBT, food assistance for next month is not going to go out. So that's yet another group of vulnerable people who are being hurt here. Government agencies across the board are being furloughed. I believe the military is being paid, so that's good. They probably would have been paid no matter what. It just would have been retroactive, because they're still serving. But there's a lot of pain associated with this government shutdown, and the Democrats are the stinkers. Whether or not you think they're justified, they're the ones causing this with a few powerful votes, where the Republicans are trying to push it through and they just can't get there. That's my assessment. Continue to leave messages and let me know why I'm wrong. Let's check in with President Donald Trump himself. Fake AI Donald Trump. I'm not sure if this is factually correct, which, okay, that's actually like real Donald Trump. But this is what fake AI Donald Trump says about his reasoning for demolishing the East Wing and building a ballroom.
The East Wing of the White House was originally built as a ballroom, but it has since been used for other purposes. I decided that it would be better to demolish it and build a new ballroom that would be more in line with the modern needs of the president and his staff This will allow us to host larger events and provide a more spacious and comfortable workspace for the president.
Once again, we heard a similar perspective from one of the 7 voters that the New York Times interviewed about this. It does make sense to me. I wish there was a way to add on to the White House rather than demolish. Just having part of the White House demolished, I think, is a really bad look for the United States while they're working on it. If they could have just taken it and built on it and covered it up and knocked out a wall or something rather than having construction equipment come in, you can see the video. I mean, they're just like tearing it apart. Not a good look. But once it's built, like so many things, there's always uproar about a change. But once it's built and it becomes the norm, like what's wrong about having a ballroom in the White House? That seems like a great idea. I don't think that's political. I think that just seems like a great idea. Now, of course, Donald Trump does this because he doesn't give a shit about anything and he'll do whatever he wants. But, 20 years from now, when we have a ballroom in the United States White House, like, isn't that a benefit? Isn't that kind of cool? That's the way I'm looking at this. Let's jump over here to USA Today. President Donald Trump's desire to build a ballroom in the White House predates his first presidency, which began almost a decade ago and spans 3 presidencies, actually. But concrete plans remained elusive until July. After months of teasing ideas for a new, big, beautiful ballroom, of course, that's how it would be described, like the one in Mar-a-Lago, his oceanfront estate in Palm Beach, Florida, Trump was ready with schematics. On July 31st, 7 months into Trump's second term as president, the White House put out an announcement with renderings of a gold-accented, lavish ballroom. It also went on to detail the cost of construction and when it would be completed. But as Americans found out on October 20th, earlier this month, when bulldozers began chewing up the East Wing, there were gaps in those details. And that's, I think, the most unfortunate part here, is that it just looks terrible. So here are some things that changed. On February 6th, as Trump stood before a crowd of elected officials, guests, and children who had assembled beneath the crystal chandeliers in the East Room to watch him sign an executive order seeking to bar transgender women and girls from participating in women's sports, something that Democrats are starting to support, Gavin Newsom and other minority voices, an old idea. He said this room is packed, before telling the audience that he'd offered to build a ballroom during both the Obama and Biden presidency from him. He says this was going to be the reception room, referring to his idea for a revamped East Room that would have served as the entrance to the ballroom he proposed. That, I think, would have been a lot better. At just under 3,000 square feet, the East Room is the biggest of the staterooms and the only one that runs the entire width of the executive mansion. Then on June 6th, Trump posted on Truth Social, the social media thing he owns, that he had inspected the site of the new ballroom that will be built. Compliments of a man known as Donald J. Trump at the White House. But in July, the White House announcement noted that a few others had also joined the cause. President Trump and other patriot donors have generously committed to donating the funds necessary for the new addition, it read. The donors included American corporations with business before the U.S. government, including Palantir, Lockheed Martin, and, hey, look at this, Meta. All right. And then it has some mock-ups of what this is going to look like. If you want to see the visuals here, go to twitch.tv/NEWZDebate and rumble.com/user/NEWZDebate. It looks pretty nice. It's just mock-ups. But in that July announcement, the White House said the ballroom will be a much-needed and exquisite addition of approximately 90,000 total square feet. Capacity of 650 people. which was a significant increase from the 200-person seated capacity in the East Room of the White House. And then here we see the bulldozers ripping it apart. Then in September, Trump told NBC News in an interview that the new ballroom would be larger than first described, with a capacity of 900 people. The seating capacity would then be calculated with an increase of 40% over the original 600, was it? That was quoted. But by October, by this month, Trump had begun saying the venue would accommodate 999 people. The old estimate of $100 million to build the ballroom had doubled by the time the July announcement came. After all, though, it does say it had come a decade since Trump first proposed it, when he proposed it earlier. And in the July announcement, it was approximately $200 million. By September, he said it would cost about $250 million. Then on October 21st, after the East Wing demolition was well underway, and it had already started, what are you going to do? Trump said the cost of the ballroom would be $300 million. Expensive, beautiful building. It's set to do many, many things, the president said, including meetings of foreign leaders and honoring of those foreign leaders. And a little bit more detail here. When they first released plans for the ballroom on July 31st, Trump told reporters the 90,000 square foot addition, as described at that time, would be built over on the east side, and it will be beautiful. Less than 3 months later, bulldozers had removed the entire east wing of the White House. The construction was no longer near the part of the building that historically housed the First Lady's offices as initially described. Instead, it was going to, take it over. And in that July announcement, it made no mention of any demolition plans. So that was a big surprise. So asked why it had been demolished after the president had said the ballroom construction would not touch the East Wing, a White House official said the scope and size of the project was always subject to vary as the process developed. Trump told reporters earlier this month on October 22nd that the decision to tear down the entire East Wing structure was made after, quote, tremendous amount of study with some of the best architects in the world. In order to do it properly, we had to take down the existing structure. This goes now a little bit about the rules. So Apostate Nate mentioned previously, well, are there rules on this? Can you just do this? I guess the answer is yes, but White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles was quoted in the July announcement saying that the executive office was fully committed to working with the appropriate organizations to preserve the special history of the White House, yet no permissions were sought for the demolition of the East Wing from the National Capital Planning Commission, which provides building and zoning advice to Washington, D.C. and approves various federal construction plans. The action drew outrage from preservationists and critics, including the former First Lady Hillary Clinton, who said Trump was destroying the White House. Asked for a response on this, a White House official told USA Today that the National Capital Planning Commission, man, they need a shorter name, does not have jurisdiction over demolition, over construction, only construction. Wow, look at that. So we only need permission if we build. We don't Republican Party. They do whatever they want. And then they go back and they try to think, how can we justify this? Sometimes it's ridiculous. Doesn't stop them from doing it. But other times, they might actually find a loophole. Therefore, according to the White House official, approval from the National Capital Planning Commission was not required nor needed for the demolition. So there's another mock-up here, and the East Wing is going to be gigantic now. It, to me, looks bigger than the actual central part of the White House that we usually identify as the White House. Wow, there it all is. All right, Apostate Nate, what do you think about that? They did not need permission for destruction. That's why they were able to just do it out of the blue without letting people know it was going to happen.
I mean, I guess it makes sense that whether the East Wing and the West Wing stay there is not the primary concern on the minds of the average voter, right? So, yeah,
Apostate Nate is stunned. He cannot reply. He's absolutely stunned by this.
Oh, can you not hear me? Oh, shoot. Hold on.
I hear you. No, we hear you, Apostate Nate. Now we got that. Yeah, man. Elon Musk kicks us in the crotch every show over here on Twitter Spaces. We got Apostate Nate, and then there was another Apostate Nate because he was leaving and trying to come back. I'm going to throw him back up. But Apostate Nate, we did hear from you saying that I guess it doesn't matter to voters whether or not the East Wing is there or not.
I mean, I guess it's something that you can probably get away with since it's not on the minds of most people. It's just not what they care about.
But do you buy this? They didn't need a permit? Like,
no, I really don't. But I would need some receipts to back up that instinct.
what do you think about this excuse that they didn't need a permit?
I think that's something an administration hell bent on deregulation.
So this is the great thing. I'm sorry, we're having a delay over here, Boss Nate. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what's going on over on Twitter Spaces, but yeah, we were having a delay. So he was speaking, I was speaking. Let's see if we can catch up. But this is the great thing about the Trump White House and Republicans in general, and I say this as a Democrat, they don't care. They act first and then ask for acceptance later, or they try to justify it later. That's what Republicans do. Boss Nate, I'm going to go ahead and start Twitter Spaces over and see if that helps. We have to do this from time to time, unfortunately. Twitter Spaces is the premier social audio experience, but it just really does suck from time to time. All right, Apostate Nate, can you hear me over there on Twitter Spaces?
Sure can. Let's hope that transatlantic style delay is gone, huh?
Yeah, that was weird. That was actually interesting because out of all the problems we've had with Twitter Spaces, that was the one I don't think I've ever encountered before was the delay. I don't think it's the internet because stereo is working perfectly well. Hey, it's Auntie McGetballs, everybody. How you doing, Auntie? Go ahead and leave us a message. We're talking about the demolishing of the East Wing in order to make room for what could be up to a 999 seating capacity of a ballroom. I hate the way it was done. I hate the transparency. I hate the fact that just bulldozers showed up one day and just started ripping apart part of the White House. It looks really bad, right? But 20 years from now, if we have a nice ballroom that seats 900, 1,000 people, if they can fit an extra chair in there, 999 seems kind of strange. Is that a zoning thing? Do you have to worry about it for the White House? It's going to be great to have the ballroom there. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. As long as they don't screw it up, which I'm sure is a possibility. I think it's definitely a good move to make. They just did it in a terrible, terrible way. And as we just read from the New York Times and USA Today, they're saying they didn't need permission. You don't need permission to demolish. I think, according to what I read, attributed to a White House spokesperson, they only needed permission to build, and they released plans. Makes me think that they did get a general stamp of approval to build, but those plans were that the ballroom was going to be attached adjacent to the East Wing, not that they were going to tear it down. So I don't know how that affects the supposed approval, I guess you could say, that they received, but they're saying they don't need a. So that's what we're going with. Let's jump back over on stereo and hear again from Grady Ray. This is probably a comment, I'm guessing, about my survey over on stereo. Who's to blame for the current government shutdown? Democrats. I'm a Democrat, and I say the Democrats are to blame, or Republicans. Let's see what Grady Ray has to say.
My guy, do you realize that the reason why they're building this ballroom is so they can bring in billionaires that's been sponsoring Donald Trump this whole entire time? While he claims that he is broke, while he claims that America is broke, these billionaires pump him and all other Republicans that agree with him with money to keep everything the way that it is. So the reason why things aren't working out is because their pockets are being filled with the same people causing the problem in the first place. They're just being very obvious about it now than they were in 2016.
So, Grady Ray, I appreciate the comment. Would love to hear more from you. You're not wrong, but you are wrong in assigning that only to Donald Trump and only to Republicans. This is something that is a huge problem with politics. Democrats, Republicans, I assume third parties are less, but just because rich people don't want to give to third parties, I don't know that specifically, given the chance, they wouldn't accept all these millions and billions of dollars. And this is one of the reasons I supported and still support Bernie Sanders. Feel the burn, everybody. He's old, but oh, he's all there. Just watched an interview that he did with Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. He's all there. He's not like Biden. He's all there. I would vote for him for president in a second if he was able to run again. I think because of his age, he's just not able to run again. So this is just politics in general. It's the same on both sides. In fact, a lot of companies give to both sides because they just want to give to whoever is in power. Um, so I would disagree with the one-sided blame game that you're playing, but not in general with what you're saying. And does the ballroom allow people in power, whichever party it is? I guess out of the two, because we're never going to have a third party president in our lifetime. Does it allow them to bring in more because they can host them at a giant ballroom in the White House? I think that's probably the case, but we've always been able to treat people well at the presidential and congressional level, at the gubernatorial level, probably other levels as well. We've always been able to, certainly mayoral level for large U.S. cities, we've always been able to treat donors well, either in just what we can give them, like a visit or a dinner or something like that, and certainly with legislation across the country. So that's not changing. But yes, this is just one upping of that. Just like when Donald Trump accepted the giant plane from Qatar, that was something that had never happened again. So okay, he extended the ability to buy the White House, but it's just par for the course of what happened previously. That's how I describe it. Apostate Nate, I think your hand was up. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, Lee, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for why I don't believe them when they say they didn't need permission. Where I live in southwestern Pennsylvania, there's an amusement park called Kennywood Park, very old. It's like 150 years old or something like that. I used to work there. And there's a ride there. It's a boat ride where you just gently sit
Oh,
down in the
really? You
boat and
used
you
to
go.
work there? How was
I used
that?
to work there,
Before
yeah.
you tell me the story, what was it like working there?
I loved working at an amusement park, Lee. I really did. I did it for maybe like three non-consecutive seasons in my life. I've always wanted to go back and do it. Mainly because I just love anything that bleeds Americana. And what's more Americana than an amusement park? Um, so yeah, that's it's a very soft spot in my heart. Anytime I talk about Americana, this place especially. If you go in the door, the main entranceway off to your right, it's right there. It's almost the first ride you see, and it is a National Historic Landmark. Its decorations for the longest time were simply skeletons. It was called like Harry's Haunted Hideaway for years. They renamed it the Old Mill and they kept the same decor. But right about when I was getting out of high school, they licensed the physical property of that ride to the company that owns Garfield, Garfield the cat. And it became a ride called Garfield's Nightmare. So they were allowed to make cosmetic changes under its designation as a National Historic Landmark, but they weren't allowed to make sweeping structural changes. So it was fundamentally the same ride physically, even though everything was Garfield here and there. The point is that there are rules to protect the amusement parks from not losing their structural integrity, and I'm supposed to believe there isn't a rule to keep the White House from losing the same. Again, that's not direct evidence of anything, Lee. I'm just explaining from my perspective why I am highly skeptical of what they're saying.
So that's a really interesting way to put it. And Auntie McItballs over on Stereo's list left us a couple messages, so we'll get to that very quickly. But I want to add, I believe, I guess I'll ask ChatGPT that the White House has changed quite a lot over the lifespan of the country since it was built. And if that was the case, then the White House would probably be more or less exactly the same as when it was first constructed. So while I understand what you're saying, and once again, we're talking about permissions, so maybe they could have gotten that permission and still done exactly what they're in the process of doing now. I think we're talking about permission and then also perhaps not being able to change things drastically. I believe the White House has changed drastically, though. So let's ask Chat GPT. And then maybe I can pull up some visuals to show on my Twitch and Rumble stream. But let's just see here what ChatGPT says, and then we'll get to Auntie McItball on stereo. The White House has gone through so many changes since its cornerstone was laid in 1792 that the original builders probably wouldn't recognize the place today. What started as a relatively modest neoclassical mansion has become a fortified, high tech nerve center of global power. When it was first built, the White House was designed by James Hoban, an Irish born architect who won a public competition. George Washington oversaw the project but never lived there. John Adams was the first president to move in 1800, and he complained about the damp, unfinished rooms and smoky chimneys. Back then, it wasn't even called the White House. That nickname became official only in 1901 under Theodore Roosevelt. So, a few of the major transformations. In 1814, during the War of 1812, the British burned the building. The black sandstone walls were later whitewashed, which gave the house its signature appearance. Hoban rebuilt it, so the original Irish constructor mostly following the original design. By the late 19th century, the place looked like a museum of bad taste. Wow, harsh words, ChatGPT. heavy drapes, patterned carpets, and stuffed animals. Really, stuffed animals? Each president redecorated with little sense of continuity. Theodore Roosevelt modernized the place, electric lighting, indoor plumbing upgrades, and the creation of the West Wing for staff offices. So the West Wing was an addition, a major addition. Before that, the president's offices were inside the main residence. The Truman Reconstruction from 1948 to 52 was a big change. Structural engineers discovered that the entire building was literally collapsing inward. Truman moved across the street. Wow, I didn't know about this. While the interior was gutted, only the exterior stone walls remained. A new steel frame was installed, essentially turning the old mansion into a modern building wrapped in its 18th century skin. Since the 20th century, the biggest changes have been invisible: underground bunkers, secure communications, sensors, and layers of security fencing. It's both a home and a military grade command center. Each administration adds its own touch. Obama installed solar panels. Oh, okay. I guess that was the one. And then Trump must have. I thought George Bush also took those down. I think that might also be the case. Trump redid parts of the West Wing decor. Biden renovated offices and upgraded security systems. In short, the White House evolved from a general mansion into a symbol of the presidency's transformation, from a statesman's residence into the headquarters of a global power. A fun bit of irony as ChatGPT, despite all the tech, it's still one of the oldest continuously occupied official residences in the world. The bones are 18th century. The guts are 21st century steel, however, with fiber optics and panic rooms. All right. So I would say for anyone who's questioning changing the White House in this way, not the permission part. So just put the permission part aside. For anyone who's questioning changing the White House, it's been changed constantly. Some of the ones that we talked about that were huge changes was there was a fire in 1814 because during the War of 1812, the building was burned by the British. Thanks a lot, UK. There was a huge renovation under Theodore Roosevelt in 1902. There was a giant reconstruction from 1948 to 1952 because the building was literally collapsing inward. Truman actually moved across the street while the interior was completely gutted, only the exterior walls remaining after that reconstruction. And then since the 20th century, once again, underground bunkers, um, layers of security fencing, that's what turned it into a military grade command center. So if we push aside, hey, wanky, right? They're saying they didn't need permission for demolition. They only needed permission for construction, which apparently they received. We're led to believe. I think that's a really interesting, totally Republican twist on this, and I congratulate them for coming up with that. And I sort of buy that. You know what? If the rules are just sort of historical and no one did that, but you actually look at the rules and it's not what you thought it was, if we were to take this for face value, good for them for figuring that out. I wish Obama had done that. I wish Biden had done that. I wish Bill Clinton had done that. This is the problem we're now facing with Trump and Republicans today, is that they are doing whatever they want. And it turns out a lot of what people thought were rules was just tradition. And I wish that a Democrat would do half of those things and not care about tradition and only focus on what are the absolute rules. Of course, Democrats are never going to do that. Pulsate Date has his hand up, but I want to welcome to the show Noble Ron, friend of the show, good guy, patreon.com/NEWZ debate supporter, Noble Ron. Ron, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Lee, how are you, sir?
I'm better now that you're here. It's always a pleasure to have you. Do you have a thought about the demolition of the East Wing and this new 999 seat ballroom that they're trying to build?
I think that, well, from what I've seen, tourists cannot take their eyes off of it. The demolition. I didn't like what they did with uh, the rose garden. I thought that was a deliberate jibe at the Kennedys. Um, besides that, I haven't
Can
heard
you
about the
remind
ball.
me what they did to the Rose Garden? Was that a separate thing that happened before the East Wing was demolished?
Right, I believe it was before, and they just paved over it, and they had like little dimmers and stuff on top.
So I'm going to look up this Rose Garden stuff, but continue with your thoughts about the demolition of the East Wing and the ballroom while I do that.
Well, from what I've seen in the news, it seems like people don't like it. It's always a fear of turning something, of changing something too much. We have a history and tradition, and therefore I think that if you don't know the specifics, what you're looking at is a lot of fear of this president possibly doing too much to change it. I think that I don't worry about it too much. And like you said, I think I heard you talk about it, and it was not something to really be so afraid of.
Yeah, once again, to redo my sort of gist of this is that 20 years from now, I think we're going to be happy that it has a giant ballroom. I think it's going to be really useful. The way they went about it,
Oh,
terrible. Just having bulldozers show up and ripping it apart, like absolutely
right.
terrible. You're right. People who are looking at the White House now, like it's an eyesore, it's an international eyesore, it's a national eyesore. But once everything is said and done, I think it's going to be quite a nice addition to a White House that has changed drastically since it was built.
Ballroom. I didn't know. I thought there was already kind of a ballroom type room already attached to it, but that sounds a little bit excessive. And like you said, now what you have is you have an eyesore, an international eyesore. It's the president's house, and it should look a certain way. You shouldn't demolish it to the point where it looks like an eyesore. Like, yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's fair to say it looks like a tornado hit it.
exactly.
It's just not it's just not what we want. So I guess if everything was exactly the same, but they had told people this was coming, and I guess you can't cover it while it's being demolished. So I guess that would have been the same. But if we had known this was coming and people could have vocally said their 2 cents and said, okay, this is still going to be great, probably supporters of Trump, and this is going to be terrible. We don't need this. Probably Democrats. I think it's fair to say it's going to be along party lines. At least we would have known it was coming rather than, holy crap, bulldozers are tearing up the East Wing of the White
Right.
House, which goes back to this eyesore issue.
But also, didn't he go beyond like what they were supposed to do, and they changed something uh, of the White House?
Oh yeah, yeah. Really quickly, we learned this from the New York Times and USA Today. This summer, plans were for like upwards of maybe 600 seats. I think there was a step in between there where it was maybe less than that, and it was supposed to be adjacent to the East Wing, somehow connected to the East Wing, so no demolition. And then in September, they started talking about something around 900 seats, 999 seats. But I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, and anyone please correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't learn about the demolition until it was basically already happening. And the way President Trump's White House is defending this, a White House spokesperson said that even though there's a commission that is in charge of construction issues in DC, especially federal construction. They said that they don't need permission to demolish, only construction. And so that leads me to believe that even though it didn't say so specifically, because they had these plans, they received some sort of permission to go ahead with a ballroom. And they did say that the plans that they had offered at different points, and this goes all the way back to Trump originally under Obama, and Biden offered to just build a ballroom and he would pay for it. Now he's paying for it, and other companies like I think Lockheed Martin. Don't quote me on that. I believe it's Lockheed Martin, but certainly Meta is definitely involved in paying for this. And we heard some pushback over on Stereo previously about, well, yeah, it's just Trump accepting money from donors and giving them something in return, which is true. That's probably part of this. And once that ballroom is complete, that is certainly something that any president would be able to do. But I countered by saying that Republicans are not the only major party in the United States that are bought and sold by corporations. So I'm not worried about that critique, because Democrats do it in very similar ways. They do it in different ways, but both parties are taking those $1 billion corporate handouts. That's how politics in America work. And that's why I love myself some Bernie Sanders. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him the way that I had hoped. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back to Ron. When you have something to say, Ron, raise your hand. As always, let me know when you want to throw in. But Apostate Nate has been waiting patiently. We're also going to jump over and hear from Auntie McItballs and any other messages we have over on Stereo. But Apostate Nate, you've been waiting to speak for a bit. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Lee, I just wanted to clarify that as I'm something somewhat skeptical of what he's doing to the White House, I'm also not under the illusion that the White House has maintained the same structure throughout its history. Um, so, for example, I was very much aware of renovations for like tunneling and things that would make it a first class um, defense outpost. And like other students of American history, I know that the White House was once attacked and had to be restored. So there's no illusion for me when I make these criticisms that this hasn't been done before. I really think I'm in your camp. I guess I don't really care, but the way that it was done just seems so crude. I don't know, Lee. It's just they could have done this better.
Yeah, I agree with that. This definitely could have been done better. I don't think for a moment that we can expect that from Trump and Republicans, but it definitely could have been better. Really quickly before we go over to Stereo, Trump's administration, specifically First Lady Melania Trump, made several major and controversial changes to the White House Road Garden in 2020. The stated goal to restore the garden closer to its early 1960s design under Jackie Kennedy and landscape architect Bonnie Mellon. Wow, great name, Bonnie Mellon. What actually happened, though, struck a lot of people as a sterile downgrade. The most obvious change was the removal of 10 crabapple trees that had framed the central lawn for decades. The Trump said they were relocated, so not destroyed, because they blocked light and sight lines to the colonnade. Not sure what that means. The garden looked much emptier, however, without them. The previous garden had a lush mix of pinks, reds, and yellows. Melania's redesign replaced most of that with pale, muted flowers, mostly white and pastel roses. The paths were expanded and made accessible under ADA guidelines, which was a legitimate modernization. That part was broadly praised. Okay, so we heard from Ron they had some more concrete or something. So, hey, well, it's ADA compliant now. Look at that. How progressive the Trumps. The garden's outdated drainage and electrical systems were replaced, and new cables were installed for live broadcasting, and functionally, that was an actual upgrade. Removing the crabapple trees, however, reduced shade and bird habitat. Oh, God. Bird habitat. The space became hotter and more exposed. A good metaphor, some said, for the Trump aesthetic: hard surfaces, less softness. So, in short, the garden became neater and more formal, but lost a lot of its character. Interestingly, Jill Biden later began quietly restoring more flowers and color to the area, softening the visual tone without reversing the structural changes. The Rose Garden's history continues to mirror the pendulum of American politics, swinging between classic order and expressive vitality. Man, ChatGPT is really hitting it out of the park with these sentence structures today. So, yeah, that's another thing that people can criticize or say, well, it's neater than it once was. I appreciate Ron bringing this up. To me, particularly, I didn't know about this. Maybe I knew about it in the past and forgot about it. It's not a huge issue, especially because, Jill Biden started bringing the color back in. So it's kind of swinging both ways. Although those structural changes, when they got rid of the trees, I love they say they weren't destroyed, but they were somewhere else. That's hard to undo. But clearly, if they wanted to, they could bring it back to what it was before the Trumps. If we can get a Democrat in the White House, good luck with that, everybody. They could just redo it, and then we just have a bunch of wasted money from president to president as we have a war of roses over the Rose Garden. So that's one issue, and clearly now the bigger eyesore and the bigger story, it's more recent, and it's also a much more drastic change, is the demolition of the East Wing. And what I think, unless they screw it up, will be a really nice 1,000-person or so capacity ballroom, which I think the White House could use. Let's jump over here to stereo, and we're going to hear from Auntie McGetballs.
How y'all doing today? This was all by design, right? The Democrats designed this shutdown. They designed for these tax credits on healthcare to expire this year, at the end of this year, because they thought they were going to be in control. They never expected Trump to win a second term. They figured Kamala would be inserted in there like she was inserted, as the runner for the Democratic Party's president. This was all by design. They knew this. The Democrats, well, when they passed this bill, these tax credits, they were in power, remember? So it was designed for it to end this year and for them to be in power and take control and screw everybody over. And it didn't work out like that. So Donald Trump just inherited this mess and he's trying to fix it. And he's doing great things. He's using these so-called tariffs that were going to destroy everything to pay for SNAP and WIC. And I'm running out of time.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. We'll hear more from Auntie McGetballs. You can leave us more comments, and we also have 2 more that you've already left that we have to get to. Always appreciate the conversation, Auntie. That's not his actual name. I just don't say his full name over on Stereo. Stereo's an interesting place. I've seen people with titles of shows with the N word, or accounts that are N word Bill or something like that. Stereo, they don't really seem to crack down on anything. Although, to be fair, you probably could find a lot of that over on Twitter X. So one thing I would say, without fact checking anything that you just told me, but it's just a thing that happens, is that everything, for the most part, has a sunset time built into it. Actual legislation will become law, but when it comes to funding things, usually it's not abnormal for things to be funded for a certain amount of time and then they come back up. If you look at gun legislation, was it the Brady bill under Clinton? I can't recall the exact details, but basically assault weapons were banned, or certain types of, really scary, dangerous guns were banned, and it was for 10 years, and then it expired, and it was never put back to be active again. Thus far, right? We can hope. We can hope. But I don't know that it makes any sense to blame one party or the other for the fact that something is not infinite. I think with funding a lot of things, that's just kind of how it works. Correct me if I'm wrong in it, anyone. But yeah, I mean, if they thought Kamala was going to be president, clearly Democratic initiatives would have been something they thought they would have been able to do. They would have the power to push through and extend or put out some new ones, get rid of some things they didn't like. And of course, that didn't happen. So I don't think it's part of some master plan the way that you presented it as. So let me know what you think about my answer. And when it comes to the tariffs, certainly the tariffs, without debate, caused a lot of instability and problems for the American economy. It has tanked the American dollar abroad. It's really low now, and it fluctuates a little bit, but it's very low right now. It has worried our allies. It has worried companies in the United States that have manufacturing abroad, that have relations abroad, that are affected by tariffs once they're actually set in stone, but then are all crazy and hard to predict when Trump says something different every day. Every meeting, he'll contradict himself in the same meeting. So I think even Republicans, from what I've seen, listened to, and read, have said that, okay, this was actually a problem while he was figuring all this out. Senator Charles Grassley went so far as trying to do a bipartisan legislative effort to prevent the president from setting tariffs. And he is a strong supporter of President Trump. He has been in Congress for years. And even he was like, the president can't do this. The president should not have this power. Now, with the tariffs seemingly set and different rates for different countries and stuff, one thing that has been talked about is what do we do with that money? I've not specifically seen that it's being used for public programs like WIC, like you just mentioned, but I just maybe am not remembering that right now. But just in general, Republicans are not for funding those programs. So I would say check your math on that, check your facts, because Republicans just don't want to fund social services across the board. Democrats don't want to really fund them either. That's why we don't live in a country like every other advanced citizen, a citizen of every other advanced nation lives. They might pay more in taxes, but they get a whole lot of stuff like national health care. We're the only advanced nation without national health care. And in fact, we pay more per capita for healthcare in the United States than any other nation, even though we're missing that main benefit that every other citizen of every other advanced nation gets. So, once again, I would say check your math on that. It just doesn't make sense to me, but I can't specifically tell you that no tariff money is going for no program that I support. I'm not sure what's going on with tariff money. I know it was being discussed. Now that we're getting this money, like what does it go for? But I'm not sure what the end result of that was, if it has been decided. Really quickly, Andrew over on or rather on Twitter Spaces wants to talk. I err on the side of live conversation, so we'll jump back to stereo and hear more from people who've left us voice messages, and continue please to do so. But let's roll the dice over here and hear from Andrew on stereo. So, Andrew, we've been talking about the demolition of the East Wing for the ballroom. We've been talking about the government shutdown. You can introduce a new topic or comment on that. Oh, yeah, you're a speaker now. Andrew, take it away. What's on your mind?
Well, howdy, howdy. It said hot takes, call in and share. So I was trying to I was just requesting the mic as soon as I got into the room so I could give my hottest take with as little background as possible. Which is contrary to logic. I didn't realize that you're probably multi-streaming this space, and I just saw only a few people in here. So, sorry about that. Now, let's see. So, there was something that you were speaking about that I had an opinion about, and I wasn't expecting to give this hot of a take. Um, so, how about let me just chill for a second, and I'll kind of get a grip on what the conversation's really about, and it won't be such a um, maybe I'll be able to be a little more informative.
Yeah, maybe it won't be such a shock, but hey, I'm open to the shock. If you want to go in a completely different direction, that's what the hot takes format is for. The overall show is called News Debates, so we like discussing news-related items and debating them, talking them out, hearing what people think. So yeah, give yourself a few seconds. You can comment on what we're discussing or go in a completely different direction. Either is totally possible. So
I
make sure you
guess
give yourself some
part
time.
of
Yeah,
so my hot take, my super hot take, just because I came in and literally in the middle of your thought, and so like I didn't even catch the beginning of what you were saying, but you were mentioning that most, I guess we'll say first world countries, the citizens have, kind of government healthcare, or it's kind of included in the subscription. Um, the other side of that coin is that here in the United States, you can be a stockholder of these companies that are fleecing the medical industry and making sure that the shareholders are being paid out with dividends. So we kind of do get fleeced on our healthcare, but and you can debate whether it's actually a fair trade. You could also own these healthcare companies and receive dividends. So and they do serve the world. So theoretically, you would kind of think that like the capitalist version of things should work out in your favor, but it doesn't really, right? You know what I mean? There are some people who own those healthcare companies, but it's not generally the people who are receiving the healthcare. So you know, uh, I would prefer to see something more like a healthcare system that works for everyone and not necessarily for the shareholders. That's what my heart says. So anyway, that's my hot take, and happy Sunday, everybody. This is my first time in the space, and so yeah, I'm going to follow the host, and I was just trying to come up as fast as possible to give my hottest take.
yeah, that's a good one. We've actually talked about this a lot. It's a passion of mine, and I agree with you a lot of what you just said. So stay with us, Andrew. Raise your hand if you have something to join in on. Um, so you're absolutely right. We are being fleeced. It really sucks to be an American in so many ways, including healthcare. You are correct in that if you have enough money to invest in the healthcare system, and or create your own, healthcare related company, there's a lot of profit to be made because we're the only advanced nation that has a for-profit healthcare system, as you pointed out. So what that means is you're right about other things as well. So our system benefits the entire world, but it benefits the rest of the world much more than it benefits average Americans. So what that means is that we come up with all the great drugs that are cheaper and all the great therapies and technology that are cheaper in other countries, but they're expensive as hell here, even if you have health insurance. So it's this trade off. It's better for the rest of the world that our healthcare system is for profit because it leads to better healthcare for everyone else. And if you're rich in the United States, not only, as you correctly pointed out, can you make money on our healthcare system, but you can also pay for everything you need. America has a lot of problems, but if you're rich, America is the country for you. We have the best healthcare in the world if you can pay for it. So there are things that you can get done here with a heavy price tag that are going to be much better than anywhere else. And even when you look at every other advanced nation, when you have some sort of ailment, affliction, injury that is not killing you this minute, you might have to wait. But then, like in Canada, so just the country a little north of us, once you wait and you get it taken care of, it's 100% free. So the way I sort of wrap all this up, like what you just said, Andrew, is that I think we've made enough medical advances that we should stop taking the hit for the rest of the world and we should have national health care like every other country. And there's a lot of ways that can play out, but a national system that mostly is free, paid for by tax dollars, we would have higher taxes. But with how expensive healthcare is in the United States, we've talked about projections on previous shows. I don't have them in front of me a lot of people in the United States would be paying just as much or maybe even less if we had national health care, because healthcare costs are so astronomical. Even if you have good coverage, there's maximum payouts and there's deductibles and all of these pre-approvals and things like that, right? So it would actually benefit most Americans by far to have a national system that was paid for with tax dollars, and the country as a whole. The US government pays more for health care without a national system than any other country in the world. So we're paying more and we're getting less. But again, the trade off is that the rest of the world gets awesome, innovative leaps and bounds from the United States, while it sucks to be an American. So I think I wrapped up everything that you just said. If I missed something, we can go back to it. But Andrew, your hand is back up. What do you think?
Yeah, you really said it better than I did. And then I also wanted to point out that it seems like there was a few years back. It seemed like there was a company that was kind of price gouging on one of their products, and at that time, it would have made more sense because it was a product that a lot of Medicaid and Medicare, like older people, used, and I can't remember what it was. But at that time, it would have made more sense based on the valuation of that particular drug company to just for the US government to buy the drug company, spin out the product that they buy from them the most, and then hold on to that IP, right? And then reintroduce the drug company back to the public market, and then they would just have the IP for that. You know what I mean? So that we don't have to pay that drug company anymore. You know what I mean? It would have actually made more sense because the amount of money, like it would have paid itself off in like a year, like the investment. And I can't remember which company it was, and I can't remember which drug
Are you
it was.
talking about
But there,
Pharma Bro?
but there are probably hundreds of drugs that would make sense to do that, right? Now that would actually, well, I can't say it would shortchange the stockholders because the stockholders that hold those companies today would be paid out on the buyout of the company, and then they would be able to buy back into it when it was reintroduced to the public market. But in terms of the particular drugs that were the most useful would be spun out. So if and I would assume that if we did a national healthcare type situation, it would actually make sense to do that type of a setup where you would effectively take over the drug company, spin out the drugs that are most needed, like insulin, perhaps the EpiPens, those types of things that are like normally they should not be as expensive as they are, right? But those happen to be the cash cows for a lot of these companies. It would make sense to spin those out, uh, nationalize those products, not the companies, right? And then just spin up take on the manufacturer of that, and then that way your healthcare system would not be burdened by the profits of shareholders. You know, uh, you don't have to pay out shareholders when you make something like open source, for instance. Not that pertains to the IP of the drug companies, but you know what I mean.
Or like public
To
public domain, like
public
patents
domain,
or
right?
old movies or something like that. So yeah, this is an interesting idea.
Like that.
I think I have the example you were talking about from ChatGPT, so we'll get to that in a moment. But the big problem I see with this is that our system of for-profit healthcare and not taking away ownership from individuals or companies, so erring on the side of individual rights and profit motive rather than public good, I would say the very system that we have prevents that from happening. So yeah, you're right. That is a
I,
hypothetical, but
I just
like
got to
I
rebut
think
here
generally that
that
doesn't
actually,
happen.
but the U.S. government subsidizes most of the research through the CDC and through these other things and through university grants and all of these things. We subsidize the research for these drug companies to take on these products in many cases. So I want to say that like
Doesn't give us
we
ownership
the
though.
citizens,
You're right. It
it
yet
doesn't give
another
it,
reason
it,
why
it,
the system is
we
broken,
shortchanged multiple
but
times.
it doesn't
We're getting
give us
shortchanged on the front end
it
and the
doesn't
back
give
end.
us the one second, Andrew. But it doesn't give us
Sorry.
the ability to own those products, right? So, like, I agree with you. Like, the government's paying for it, the American people are getting screwed over, but the system doesn't give us the return on those investments. That's the whole idea I was getting across earlier, right? Is that it sucks for us, but it is beneficial for everyone else in the world. So we'll go back to Andrew. I see he raised his hand again. He knows how the song and dance works. I think what he was
Yes.
talking about was Pharma Bro Martin Shkreli, a former hedge fund manager and pharmaceutical executive who became one of the most hated men in America around 2015. So I'm sharing this on my twitch.tv/NEWZ debate and rumble.com/user/NEWZ debate live video simulcast. Shkreli ran a small drug company called Turing Pharmaceuticals, which acquired the rights to Daraprim, a decades-old drug used to treat a serious parasitic infection called toxoplasmosis, especially dangerous for people with weakened immune systems like HIV/AIDS. The drug had been on the market since the 1950s, selling for about $13.50 per pill. After Turing bought it, Shkreli jacked the price overnight to $750 per pill, more than a 5,000% increase. His justification was that the profits would fund new research, which is basically what America is, but it was transparently a cash grab. The move wasn't illegal. The U.S. lacks price controls on many drugs, like I was talking about before, but it was a brutal move nonetheless. The public outrage was immediate and enormous. Shkreli didn't help himself. He leaned into the villain image, taunting critics online, smirking in interviews, and buying a rare Wu-Tang Clan album for $2 million. He became a symbol of greed in the pharmaceutical industry. Eventually, the law caught up with him, however, not for price gouging, but for securities fraud. He was convicted in 2017 for misleading investors and two hedge funds he managed before the Turing Company. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and banned for life from the pharmaceutical industry. He was released in 2022 but remains under federal supervision. Regulators later ordered him to repay $64 million in profits and banned him from working in pharmaceuticals ever again. That's interesting that they could do that. I also remember something about insulin price gouging, but I don't know specifically what that was. But yeah, this was Pharma Bro. This was the guy that everybody hated. And clearly, this was something that was allowed in the United States, which is really a great example of how bad our system is. But like, was it Al Capone? They got him on something else and sent him to prison and basically ended his. Jump back over to stereo and hear more from Auntie
Tax
Mika
evasion,
Balls.
Lee.
And Trump was also able to find the money to pay our service members in the military. So, and I don't know if that came from the tariff that he's imposed. I don't know where that money come from for sure, but I know that tariff money was used to fund WIC and SNAP, or one or the other. So, I mean, if he really wanted, or if he was really at fault for this shutdown, you think he would go that far to find money to help these people fund SNAP or WIC and pay our military? I don't think so. It just doesn't sound right. You just got to use a little common sense. I know it's not that common anymore still, but yeah, this is all Democrats.
So we'll hear from Apostate Nate in a moment. Sorry, Apostate Nate, they're playing the message, and then I heard you jump in. So raise your hand to remind me to throw you up.
That's okay, Lee. It's
But
not a
really
big
quickly, this is but just raise your hand. I want to hear from you. So this has been the second comment from Auntie Mega Balls over on stereo about tariffs, and I wanted to try to get to the answer on that. So import taxes, those are what tariffs are, raised under Trump's recent trade push, have brought in tens of billions of dollars into the United States and our Treasury's general fund. So the revenue from tariffs is not earmarked in most cases for a specific program. So It's just money. It's the general fund, which is sometimes called America's checkbook and can be used for whatever Congress decides it wants to use it for. One key use has been using tariff revenue to help reduce the federal budget deficit rather than borrowing more money. Another use that has been floated for the increased tariff funds, but not yet realized, is giving rebates or dividends to Americans funded by that tariff money. This would require new legislation. So that's like the COVID payments that we all probably received, or like the Bush tax cuts, like you just give money to Americans. What is not happening, though, is that it's not been dedicated that pays automatically this or that thing. It's a general revenue that Congress can decide what they use it for. So once again, rebates or direct payments have been proposed, hasn't happened. And although Trump has claimed, quote, we'll use tariff money to pay for everything, economic analysts point out tariffs still make up a very small share of overall federal revenue, nowhere near enough to fund large scale programs by themselves. So I don't think it's been used to fund social programs like WIC, anti-makeup balls. If you find something that says that, go ahead and tell me. I don't think that's true. It's just part of a general fund. Trump has said lots of things, but Trump says a lot of things about everything. Your second part, the Republicans, the Trump White House, Congress, has pushed through payments for troops. That was something they wanted to do. So even though the government is shut down, troops are being paid, from what I've read. What's interesting here is that they were going to be paid no matter what. Most people who don't receive pay during a shutdown, historically, in the last several decades, are then paid afterwards once the government is funded through new congressional legislation. What they did here was that they kept those payments going. They didn't use tariff money. They used some other money. The government has money, even though we have a huge deficit. And that was something that had to be done. That was not something that was automatic. Now, those troops would have been paid. They're one of the services of the government that when they're working during a government shutdown, they are paid afterwards. What is different is that there are furloughed government employees, so they're not working, that may not end up getting paid for this time that they're not working. From what I understand, if you are working during a government shutdown, whether or not you're paid currently like troops are, if you're working, you will be paid afterwards. I believe the key difference is if you're furloughed. Historically, I think most furloughed government employees have basically just been on vacation, forced vacation, and then they're paid afterwards. And I'm against that. If you're a government employee, you should know that this can happen and it's just part of your job. But if you don't work, you shouldn't be paid. I don't want to pay people for not working. And I know it's a bad situation to be in, but even under the Trump administration and Elon and cutting all the waste and, doing all that with the chainsaw, government work is still very, very, very 10 varies stable. And you mostly keep your job if you're a government worker. So that being the case, I don't have a problem with people having forced vacations where they don't get paid afterwards. But if you're working, you should be paid afterwards. And if we can pay you during the government shutdown, that's even better. And almost always that's the case. So anti-makeup balls, and I would just advise you to go look up what this tariff money is being used for. I don't think it's being used for the ways that you described, but I appreciate the comments back and forth. Apostate Nate is one of my patreon.com/NEWZ debate supporters. You're at the front of the line. Was there something you wanted to add?
Hi, Lee. There was, but I think you covered it when you were talking. I think I was just trying to briefly affirm something you had a question about. That's all. No big deal.
Solid. All right. We'll continue going through some stereo messages, but Andrew, your hand is up again.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, well, first of all, the debt and deficits have gone up under Trump faster than any tariff revenue has been coming in. And I wanted to point out that WIC, to answer the gentleman's question, is usually part of the Farm Bill. And so that's where farmers get subsidies from providing food for people that don't have. So it works out good for the American farmer, and it also works out well for the people or people who are currently in a position where they're not bringing in money. And so there used to be a balance there, and now the farmers are being kind of getting strapped in both directions because their exports are being limited by the tariffs, because these other countries are going to Brazil or wherever to get their imports, and then they're also, as of here in a couple of days, the WIC recipients will not be receiving, on November 1st, they won't get their check. And so you could assume that it impacts, that's going to impact the farmers as well. So it's going to be really bad. That's all. That's my hot take. It's going to get really, really bad for everybody.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier in the show, and that's fine, you weren't here. That's the nature of social audio, that starting November 1st, food subsidies from the government for those in need. So food stamps, that sort of a thing that may or may not include WIC. It makes sense that it would. Are just not going to happen because the government is shut down. And once again, even as a liberal person, a Democrat, I blame the Democrats because they're not going to win, in my opinion, this battle, and they're just hurting a lot of people. Really quickly, from ChatGPT, the WIC program, short for Women, Infants, and Children, wow, so genderized, is a U.S. federal nutrition program that provides food assistance, health care referrals, and nutrition education to low-income pregnant women, new mothers, and young children. It's not welfare in the general sense. It's a targeted public health program designed to make sure babies and mothers don't suffer from malnutrition during critical developmental periods. WIC gives eligible recipients monthly food benefits for specific nutritional items: milk, eggs, cereal, peanut butter, fruits, vegetables, baby formula, etc. Vouchers or EBT cards. EBT is the digital version of food stamps that can be used at authorized grocery stores. Nutrition counseling and health screenings like weight checks and anemia testing, as well as referrals to healthcare and social services. WIC is 100% federally funded, but it's administered by the states, so just like Medicare, Medicaid. The money comes from annual appropriations by Congress to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So we just heard from Andrew, talked about the Farm Bill. The USDA's Food and Nutrition Service oversees the program and distributes funds to states, where they then do it on their end. States manage participants. Funding levels are determined by Congress each fiscal year. So to go back to what we heard from Auntie McGetballs on stereo, the fact that things run out and they're not just continuous is often how the government works. And you can criticize that, but it's kind of just how it works. And usually that looks like around $6 to $7 billion annually in recent funding years. It's what's called a discretionary program, meaning Congress decides the budget each year. That's unlike SNAP food stamps, which are entitlement programs that automatically expand if more people qualify, unless money is taken away from them, which Republicans are trying to do and I think have. Okay, so that's all good there.
Clarify, I think
Yes,
SNAP is part of the Farm Bill as well. Can you clarify that?
Thank you, Andrew, for pointing out WIC again. I should read about it. Let me ask here. Are WIC and SNAP part of the Farm Bill? Yes, both are tied to the Farm Bill, but in different ways and to different degrees. SNAP, what most people call food stamps, is a core part of the Farm Bill, which is renewed roughly every 5 years. SNAP is the largest and most expensive part of it, usually around 80% of total Farm Bill spending. WIC, on the other hand, is not technically part of the Farm Bill. It's authorized and funded separately under the Child Nutrition Act of 1966, which is usually reauthorized every 5 years as well, but not as part of the Farm Bill. So once again, to go back to Untimate constantly is just how things often work here in the United States. All right. So we have Andrew with his hand up again. We'll check in with you in a moment. Andrew, let's go back to stereo and hear more from Make It Balls.
Do y'all remember during the Obama administration, they were making changes to the White House, but they had everything undercover. You know, there was a big fence built around it where you couldn't see in there and see what was going on. Nobody questioned that. What were they building? Why were they building it? I've never heard of what they were building. I don't know if you guys have, but if you did, I'd like to know. But I don't think anybody knew. So why aren't we questioning that?
So some of these messages on stereo were left before we covered different things. But to go back and talk about the White House, Obama did not demolish the East Wing without telling people. So that is just a categorically false comparison. But Obama installed solar panels. Let's see, is there anything else? I'll ask again. See if we can get some more clarification on that. But whatever the case, they did not demolish the East Wing without telling people. And even if they had told people, including that ballroom, even a smaller version of it, which is what we heard over the summer, there were many different updates, would still be much more of a drastic change than anything Obama did. When the Obamas moved in, the White House tech situation was almost comically outdated. So they installed secure Wi-Fi and cell networks, upgraded computer servers, cybersecurity systems, made the first official White House website. Oh wow! And social media presence, whitehouse.gov, Twitter, YouTube, etc. Allowed staff to use more modern devices like iPads and Blackberries that were securely configured, but they could still use those devices. The Obamas subtly modernized the decor, particularly in the old family dining room, which Michelle Obama reopened to the public for the first time. President Obama ordered the installation of solar panels, as we mentioned previously. That was the first time since Jimmy Carter's panels were removed under Reagan. Michelle Obama created the White House Kitchen Garden on the South Lawn. President Obama emphasized accessibility and diversity, from ensuring ADA compliance in more visitor areas to hosting cultural events. And after years of neglect, President Obama quietly approved security and infrastructure upgrades like better fencing, modernized communication lines, and reinforced windows and barriers. So I'm not sure if they ever had some covers up for any of the work that they did. But to be frank, that's probably the best thing to do. So you don't have these kinds of eyesores that we're now seeing when it's covered up. That would be a really big cover, and you'd like hear a bunch of terrible sounds underneath it. So maybe in this specific instance, that wouldn't be possible. But the idea that it's covered up, I don't think there's anything secretive about that. And once again, the way Make It Balls described what the Obamas apparently did to the White House, I don't think it stacks up when you have the facts in front of you. Okay, yeah, we're going back to Andrew over on Twitter Spaces.
Hello, yeah. So I just want to go back and touch on. I heard SNAP benefits referred to as a cost, even though we admitted that it was part of the Farm Bill. And so, even though there was like a $7 billion number, I think that you threw out there, I was curious how much of that actually goes back to American farmers. So in the terms of like
Just
subsidies,
because it's part of the
literally,
farm bill doesn't mean it has to go to farmers, though. You understand that, right? It's just part
well,
of the
but
farm
well,
bill.
but the thing is, well, but that government cheese comes from American cows and farmers who raise those cows. I just want to point that out that like you're just moving, so it's not a cost. Actually, you're actually paying people to do work. They're actually doing the work.
Yeah,
It's
but
paying
it's a
people, not.
government cost
I
because
want to
otherwise it's a private industry. So if the government is paying
right
farmers and then give those foods to people who need them, it
for
is a
buying
cost for the government
product.
because it's a private industry
It's
that the government is
different.
participating in.
But I want to point out that there are different subsidies. There's subsidies to not grow crops, right? And then there's subsidies to actually do what you were set up to do, which is kind of what the part of SNAP and WIC and the Farm Bill all really do. They're paying people to actually do work, and then they create a market for their goods that is perhaps the market is subsidized for the people who can't afford the goods, but you're still moving the goods. It's not like you're trashing a bunch of wheat or, there are other subsidies where you get paid to
So I
grow.
believe you're talking about
What I'm
very
saying?
different things. So yeah, when you pay farmers to not grow something, which is something that definitely happens, it's about price. It's about stabilizing a market, which even in our free enterprise capitalist system, there are checks and balances on the market. This is why we will bring companies before Congress for antitrust issues or actually file legal documents saying that this company engaged in antitrust, this, that, or the other. So these things exist, but paying farmers to not grow something is not the same thing as paying them to provide necessary food to people who need it, which doesn't happen in this country as much as every other country in the developed world. But we do have some examples of that, just like even though we're not a socialist country like Finland, we do have Medicare and Medicaid and other public programs like WIC, EBT food stamps, and et cetera, right?
Exactly. And so I just wanted to highlight the difference there that, even though you might calculate it as a government cost, you're literally keeping and you can say it's a national security cost to actually have farmers that are thriving, growing goods for people that are going to actually consume those goods, as opposed to, welfare queen farmers that want to literally get paid to not farm. You see what I'm saying?
Right. They're different things, but it still is a cost. Just like road construction is a cost, even though it helps people, it's still a cost. Anything the government does is a cost. And they raise the money for those costs through taxes and a small amount, as we already established, from tariffs, even though tariff amount is increasing with the new tariff rules that have eventually been set up by the Trump administration that were opposed by Republicans like Senator Charles Grassley, who's from the Midwest somewhere. But it's all a cost. It's not inappropriate to call it a cost because the government's spending money to provide services and products to Americans who need them in general, like roads, public schools, or for specific Americans who need more help, like EBT, SNAP benefits, and WIC. Let's do a hard turn back to the East Wing. We've been talking to fake AI President Trump. One thing that we haven't yet established is why there was no pre-announcement of weeks or months that the East Wing was going to be torn down. That was pretty shocking to a lot of people. They did talk about building a ballroom, but it was never quite as large as the current plans are now calling for. So, fake AI President Trump, why the secrecy? Why no notice about tearing down the East Wing?
I understand that some people may have been surprised by the decision to demolish the East Wing, but I believe that it was the right thing to do. The White House is a historic and important building, and it is important that it continues to function effectively. I believe that this decision was necessary to ensure that the White House can continue to meet the needs of the president and his staff.
Perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical, right? We just didn't tell anybody about this. Once again, I'm still for the ballroom. I think it's a solid move. In 20 years from now, we're going to be glad it's there, especially since apparently tax dollars are not being used for that. It raises questions, but all right, anytime we don't have to use tax dollars, that seems like a good idea in a country where we don't have high taxes like many other countries, and we don't want to pay for things, and we just want people to suffer. But the secrecy and not telling people, I don't think can be defended. Even if they didn't need a permit to do that, it's a bad move all around. Yeah, Apostate Nate, your hand is up.
I think what I wanted to ask you, Lee, was that what do you, and you've probably hit on this to a certain extent. I'm completely ambivalent, I think, as to the idea of a ballroom. You see a lot of active good in that. Um, what dividends do you think that could pay? And I have a second slightly related question, which is, was there no capability of hosting a ball at the White House before? Um, I mean, that would have to matter to me, if we're talking about a good use of money. Then again, it is his. I don't know, Lee. What do you think?
So yeah, good question. From ChatGPT, uh, yes, and they did lavishly. For much of its history, the White House was not just a residence and office, but Washington's main party venue. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, hosting balls there was a presidential tradition, sometimes political, sometimes diplomatic, sometimes just for show. In the early 1800s, presidents like James Madison and John Quincy Adams held grand balls in the East Room, which is no longer there, the largest space in the White House with live orchestras, blah, 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 blah. Adams even had wooden floors installed specifically to make dancing easier. Hey, everybody, Adams, the dancing president. Andrew Jackson famously hosted a rowdy inaugural reception in 1829 where guests trashed the furniture and tracked mud across the rugs. During the Gilded Age, things got fancier. The East Room and Blue Room hosted formal dances, military balls, and state dinners where European diplomats would bring full regalia. The guests could hit 1,000 people, but the rooms would be packed and the air thick with perfume and cigar smoke. Yeah, just like everywhere else, they used to smoke indoors there. By the time of Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt, the vibe had shifted from raucous ball to formal state event. Um, Starting around the 1950s, large formal balls moved out of the White House. The building simply couldn't handle the crowd sizes or security needs. Instead, inaugural balls and major galas shifted to convention centers and hotels around Washington, D.C. Presidents still hosted state dinners, receptions, and smaller formal dances inside the White House, but nothing like the enormous public balls of the past. That's probably fire hazard stuff. In the past, you could just pack everybody in and no one cared. My guess is they ran up against just, updated standards. The East Room could still fit a decent dance floor, though. The Clintons, Obamas, and Bidens have all had musical performances and dancing there for special occasions, but just scaled to modern reality and Secret Service limits. So, I guess the return on this, to answer the other part of your question, Apostate Nate, is that now we will be able to do that at the White House. I don't know what the cost difference is of hosting it in this theoretical ballroom that is supposedly going to be built. And Jesus, I hope they do. And it's not just they tore down the East Wing and then put up a wall where it used to be. But if they do, I assume it's cheaper to hold it at the White House. I can't tell you that because they're not paying to rent out space and having to do more impromptu Secret Service protection as opposed to, an area of the White House that they know and built and know what is everything there associated with it. I can't tell you that for a fact, but that seems like a cost saving measure, and especially since the new ballroom will not be paid for with tax dollars, which would pay for, I assume, renting out convention centers and hotel rooms around the DC metropolitan area. And again, my 2 cents, I think it makes sense. The White House, despite that Trump seems to be at Mar-a-Lago a lot more than the White House, is our presidential palace. And if you're going to have meetings with the presidents in Washington, D.C., with foreign dignitaries or whoever it might be, it should be at the White House. I think the White House could be expanded even more. Let's do it tastefully, and let's not have the eyesore that we have right now. And let's have, announcements that things are going to be torn down and changed rather than what we just got with the Trump administration. Like, let's do more construction at the White House. Let's have everything there that we can possibly have with that space. Knock down the gates and expand and take out roads and make it a bigger complex. This would happen in years and decades, but the idea that the White House is just what it is, and maybe we change the rose garden and get rid of some crab apple trees and take off solar panels or put them back on, like, that's just chump change. Like, let's put in some stuff and let's really deck out the White House. I'm all for it. Apostate Nate, what do you think about that?
Lee, I think it's not a big ask to say that if you're going to make some grand architectural changes, that you do it in a way that doesn't make your backyard look like a pile of rubble and construction equipment. The United States can do better than that, Lee. As far as like the whole ballroom situation goes, I think it's a big fat vanity project. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a big distraction as long as the White House had the capability of hosting balls to the world's richest people and dignitaries, which they probably did. You just went through that. I really do look at this as Trump's vanity project. It is exactly the type of thing we would expect someone of his composure to do. He wants that godlike political figure status. You don't get that without making a few monuments or something, Lee. That's what he's after.
Absolutely. I agree with you. This is such a thing that Trump would do. If 20 years from now the White House is better, I don't like the way they did it. I agree with you. That was terrible, and it looks really bad now. But supposedly in my mind, we'll see what actually happens. I think the benefits are going to outweigh the eyesore and the lack of accountability and the debate about did they need a permit to demolish, that sort of a thing. I'm really excited for this, and if it's the Trump ballroom, so be it. I mean, I don't like Trump. There are some things he has done and stands for that I actually do support. And I think more Americans should openly admit that when Trump does something that they're for, they're like, all right, don't like him, but this is a good idea. I like the tariffs. I think the instability until the tariffs were finalized was terrible. And again, it should have been handled in a different way. But we are getting hosed by our allies. Like, we have been writing checks to countries that don't need them. And even countries that do need them. Once again, to go back to my previous rant about how much it sucks to be an American, we can use that money here. American money should be for Americans. I'm 100% for that. I was not shedding a tear when they gutted USAID and when they took federal funding away from NPR and stuff like that. NPR is biased, and I'm a liberal person. I don't care about spending money in poor developing countries to save people's lives when Americans, in theory, we're not going to take that money and do this. So that's unfortunate. But Americans, in theory, should be benefiting from that funding. American money for American people. I'm a liberal guy and I am absolutely for that. Yeah, Andrew got dropped, so we'll bring him back up. He has requested to speak. In the meantime, while I'm bringing up Andrew, let's hear from Auntie McGetballs again over on stereo.
Well, okay, here you go. According to Grok, the Trump administration is indeed using tariff monies to supplement WIC, not SNAP. So I was wrong about which one or the other or both, but according to Grok, he is using tariff money, $300 million, to pay for WIC. It's a program for women and infant children to get benefits. So there you go. That's my source, I guess.
Yeah, Grok, not my go-to AI. I use ChatGPT here on the show, but I can't confirm that. But if that's what it said, that's great. And I'm over on ChatGPT. Yes, according to recent reports, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, so gendered, WIC, has been funded using tariff revenue under the Trump administration, though the arrangement is unusual and raises legal questions. With the federal government shut down beginning in early October, so this month, WIC, which serves millions of low income mothers and young children, was facing imminent funding exhaustion. The White House announced that unspent tariff revenue would be redirected to WIC to keep it operating. For example, a news article states that about 300 million, so same number as we heard from Auntie McGetballs, in unspent tariff revenue was allocated to WIC using unspent funds. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, which administers WIC, confirmed that tariff revenue will be used to fund WIC for the foreseeable future. However, the legal authority for redirecting tariff revenue to WIC is not fully clear, because once again, that's supposed to be done by Congress. While the money is intended to bridge a funding gap caused by the shutdown, it is not a permanent structural solution. WIC traditionally is funded through annual congressional appropriations under the Child Nutrition Act of 1996, as we discussed previously. Details about exactly how much will be redirected, how fast states will receive the funds, and for how long this will last are still emerging and vary by state. So I would say what I said earlier to pull a move from the Republicans is technically correct. They are not funding WIC, because when you fund something, you either have less funding or no funding, or just whatever the funding number is, and you increase that amount. Or WIC is going to be shut down because Congress is not approving it, not from the shutdown. We'll get to that in a moment. But the Trump administration is using unspent tariff revenue to fund
a farm bill.
Andrew, you got to wait your turn, man. Sorry, man. It's not going to work that way. I'll get you in a second. Please stay with us. But the way that this is being represented, and I assume is factually correct, is that WIC, like so many other government services, was going to end because of the shutdown. And so they're substituting what is already congressionally approved for money that is unspent tariff revenue. And the money, from what I understand, is the same amount or less of what they would have been getting if the government didn't shut down. So I would say technically they are not funding WIC. They are giving money that WIC already should receive, but is cut off because of the government shutdown to keep WIC going. Now, that is a fine difference. It's not an enormous difference. But when someone says, oh, they're using this money to fund something, it goes back to what I said previously. It's had a reduction in funding. There's no funding. They're increasing the funding. This is just, oh, this credit card doesn't work and I'm using a different credit card. Or this money burned in a fire and I'm using different money, but it's still the same amount. So I appreciate the correction, Auntie Megaballs. I definitely did not know about this. So this is new information and I just learned about it. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. But it's the same funding. It's just it would have been cut off by and was getting cut off by the government shutdown, but now it apparently has been resumed. But is that legal? Because Congress is supposed to do that. How is the money going to be spent? How is it going to be distributed? Those details seem to be yet to be finalized. I'm glad this happened, just like I'm glad the troops are being paid, but the troops would have been paid eventually. WIC would have received money eventually once the government shutdown ends. But the people who could, in theory, still receive WIC benefits during the shutdown, that is a great win win for America. So I'm glad this happened. This is great. But I don't think it's technically funding WIC with tariff revenue. And certainly it's not funding WIC with tariff revenue the way that legally that usually happens. All right, Andrew, you had something you wanted to add?
Oh yeah. So I guess I have lots of questions. So I'm curious, the money from tariffs that are helping out WIC and SNAP, are those funds actually still buying the product from the American farmers? So is it still part of a the farm bill type of a situation? That's one question. Like, is everybody getting taken care of? Because if the system
Yeah,
falls
let's go
apart,
through these. Let's go
it's
through
harder
these
to
one
rebuild the
by one.
system.
My guess is that since it is the WIC system and the system is still in place, but they ran out of money because of the government shutdown, it's functioning the way that it did previously. That's my guess. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And then also, I wanted to add that held 200 people. Supposed to hold 665 people according to whatever Google AI, and the current ballroom is supposed to hold, or like the current plans for the ballroom, the White House ballroom, should hold 999 people. Um, and I'm curious if there are 1,000 people who actually want to attend a ball at the White House. And then my other question is,
Absolutely.
this
Absolutely. There are 1,000 people who want to attend a ball in the White House. Are you kidding me? I would attend a ball at the White
and this
House. Everybody wants to attend
also
the White
came from
House.
private funding. And I'm curious, are there any benefits to being a private funder, and how many private funders were there? So, like, do we have any information on like who actually did fund this giant ballroom, and what benefits are being traded? Emoluments, so to speak. Uh, like what type of benefits are being swapped around, and so who are the actors that are throwing the money around? I'm curious.
Sure, we can go over this again. We did this earlier in the show. Once again, the nature of social audio is that you only hear what you're present for. So let's go ahead and redo this again. This is from USA Today, sharing this on twitch.tv/NEWZ debate and rumble.com/user/NEWZ debate. So Donald Trump gave money to this. It doesn't have specific figures, but in addition, other donors included American corporations with business before the U.S. government. That includes Palantir. I'm not familiar with that company. Lockheed Martin, definitely familiar with that company, as well as Meta, so Facebook. They gave money towards this. What that means, we don't know. I mean, we know the East Wing was going to be torn down, so I'm not surprised we don't know some of these details. Maybe we'll know them in the future. Maybe we won't. But that's what I'm getting from USA Today. There might be some more information out there, but you are correct that there were several versions of the ballroom floated. The most up to date I have seen is 999 people, which seems ridiculous. Let's get an extra chair in there and call it an even thousand. But as we read from ChatGPT just a moment ago, while they did have big balls. Oh wow! Hey, look at that. Yeah, we used to have balls in the United States. Well, they did have big galas and big ballroom type things that ChatGPT she told us like 150 years ago was 1,000 people. That often led to broken furniture and mud all over the place. And clearly, that was not safety. It was not up to safety codes of 2025. It also mentioned that there was lots of smoke because people were smoking cigars. I can imagine maybe a couple of people could smoke cigars in the White House, but like you're not going to have hundreds of people in the ballroom smoking cigars. That's my guess. Donald Trump's president. If it's built while he's still president, maybe I'll be shown to be wrong in the future. So the fact that this is so much larger is because of safety requirements, also security requirements with the Secret Service and everything else. So that's why, even though this is about 1,000 people, and 150 years ago they had big parties with 1,000 people, 150 years ago, just imagine the differences in American life that now is just not allowed anymore because of updated safety codes and American with Disabilities regulations, those sorts of things. Andrew, please continue. Did you have more?
Yeah, I was going to bring up the idea that this is somehow going to save money. If you somehow have to orchestrate 1,000 people into a ball, keep them safe. These are all like high level diplomats and things. You have to keep everyone safe. So your security is going to be through the roof on managing 999 people. I just want to point that out, that like a lot of people are going to be working overtime out there at the White House.
But this might also be a part that you missed. We talked about this previously on today's show. They used to do this there was always a high cost. And while I can't tell you this is going to be cheaper because I don't know those variables, logically, I think it makes sense that once this is built, especially since it's built with non-tax dollar money, it's cheaper to hold an event in the White House, in an area of the White House that they know everything about because they just recently built it, versus having to do that off-site somewhere. And so the number of 999, that's a capacity. It doesn't mean that it has to be that. I hope that if they do build something like this, they actually do get to that capacity, because what's the point of having it if not? But you can have giant convention centers that have hundreds of people, and my guess is that is a couple of things: more expensive because it's off-site, it's not government property; more difficult to have the same level of security that you could have at the White House, right? Because once again, it's off-site. Even if it's the same convention center that they've used from time to time, it's not the same as being at the White House. And then also you have kind of like soft concerns. I mean, we should be having presidential galas, presidential parties at the president's house. This is our presidential palace. This is our seat of executive government, and we should have things there. I mean, this completely makes sense to me. Andrew, if you disagree, that's great. Why does this not make sense, aside from the fact that we don't know if there are going to be favors to the people who are funding it, the fact that they demolished the East Wing without telling anybody? But 20 years from now, once this is built, and assuming it's built really well and is really awesome, like some of the visuals, I'm on a visual right here. It looks really, really nice. It's generated, of course, but it looks like a photo. What's the downside of this once we get past all the unpleasantness that's happening right now? Anything to add, Andrew, about this? Why is this not a good idea?
No, you made some good points. You convinced me.
Hey, look at that, everybody.
Well, and I only
Again, there's a lot
concede
of
because
baggage.
you pointed out. I concede to your arguments because you did highlight the fact that this has kind of been done in a non-normal, traditional, systemic way. Perhaps it could have been handled better. I don't know. So yeah. But I'm with you. I'm with you.
No, I mean it definitely could have been handled better. Even a non-Trump Republican president would have handled this better than Trump. I think a Democrat probably wouldn't have done it. Perhaps anyone other than Trump wouldn't have done it. But name a Republican president of late or presidential aspiree who could be president in the future from the Republican Party, they would have handled this better. Would they have done it at all? That's a good question. And then same thing for Democrats. But I think this is great. Once again, expand the White House even more, knock down the fences, and take over a street. And you know, if anything, it's weird because it's Donald Trump who spends so much time at Mar-a-Lago. But that illustrates the point of even though he's building this, he spends a lot of time away from the White House. And the White House, I think, should be where we do as much as possible related to the president. And I think this allows us to do even more. Is this needed? That's probably my biggest fault that I would find with this, aside from the unpleasantness right now of, well, the plans changed constantly and we didn't know the East Wing was going to be torn down. Once you move all past this, was this needed? Well, you can now hold events at the White House, theoretically, in the future, hopefully the near future, that you could never hold before in the last several decades because of safety requirements and security requirements and all these other requirements, which is why we can't have giant parties at the White House anymore. This fulfills a need, but was the need actual? Or is it just, well, now that we have this giant ballroom, now we can have parties? I will say, even if it's just for the sake of argument, now that we have this giant ballroom, we can have parties. I'm 100% for it because we should have this capacity at the White House. We should have a giant group photo of hundreds of people at a party at the White House. I feel good about that. Andrew.
I guess you have to think about security in multiple ways. Um, there are like top secret areas and information inside the White House. So you could say that there is a liability to having that many free flowing people on site at any one time in terms of espionage and things like that. I just wanted to throw that out there as just a concept, you know, an argument perhaps against having people on site at the White House.
Yeah, it's an interesting dimension. Thanks for bringing that up. I think the White House is probably the safest place in the world. So having more people there, I don't think is an issue. Once this is built, they'll have that capacity built out as well, in theory. But it makes it a bigger target. If you couldn't have these sort of giant get-togethers with world leaders at the White House before, and you were a terrorist organization or whatever, and you were thinking like, okay, we want to attack the White House, boy, are you going to consider it more when there's hundreds of dignitaries and world leaders at the White House. But it goes back to my previous comment. I think it's the safest place in the world. There's so many bunkers and things built in there. Then your second concern, security, information, espionage. Aside from Donald Trump leaving out some documents on a table somewhere that are his eyes only, which, by the way, it's Donald Trump. I'm not going to put it past him. No one's going to gain any information by going to the White House. Again, I think it's the most secure, safe, lockdown place in the entire world, aside from maybe like a Fort Knox or like a nuclear facility. Places where people routinely go, White House tours, people going to the White House. I think it's probably the safest place in the world. That's just my assumption. I could be wrong, but that's how I consider it. So it makes it a bigger target. You're absolutely right. But since it's so safe already, as long as they don't drop the ball, which, by the way, Trump had, he was hit in the ear with a bullet or a bullet fragment, and someone camped outside his golf course in Florida for like 12 hours and didn't get a shot off, luckily. And of course, what just happened to Charlie Kirk and other things. Safety is an issue, but again, I think this is the safest place in the world. Apostate Nate, do you disagree with any of that? I'm doing a lot of extrapolation here. There's not a lot of facts available, but do you think this makes the White House more of a target? Is it an espionage concern?
No, it doesn't. Everybody knows where the White House is, Lee. It's on everybody's target for a potential nuclear war. Okay. I'm more worried about what they're doing in the Kremlin as far as the safety of the White House is concerned, more than I am about somebody ruining a ball, for sure.
Plus, like, all those prom pictures they do across the United States. Man, we were going to have some nice White House gala pictures. I'm really looking forward to that.
Lee,
I don't know what the
keep thinking of
timeline
that
is on
picture
this. I
of
haven't seen that
shining.
anywhere. I might have just missed it.
Lee, I think we have some big ugly delay again. My apologies.
Did you just compare? Oh no, delay. No, that maybe I'll reset the.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
we've been
was
having
I
that
was
problem over on
comparing
Twitter Spaces. But you
Richard
mentioned The
Thompson.
Shining.
Correct. Yeah, I'm sure that you remember that photo, right?
Yeah, it's like 1928 or something, and then Jack Nicholson is right there.
Yep, it's such an iconic picture, isn't it? I suspect that I'm not the first of your listeners to have had that image when it comes to your story here.
Yeah, that'll be great. It'll be like 2027 or something, and they're having a big picture with all the world leaders, and you'd be like, "Is that Abraham Lincoln? Is that Andrew Jackson over there having a real shindig with a bunch of cigar smoke and mud across all the carpets?" Yeah, certainly. Yet another reason to like the ballroom. Opens up all these amazing possibilities. Okay, we have gone more than 2 hours, which is usually a sweet spot for the show, but we can keep going if people have hot takes and opinions they want to do. We're live over on Stereo, so continue leaving us some voice messages on Stereo. We're live on Twitter Spaces, sending video to Twitch and Rumble. One thing that I wanted to get across before the end of the show, so I'll just do that now. I blame Democrats for the shutdown because they're the stinkers. They're the minority. I don't think they're going to win, so it makes it even worse. Over on Stereo right now, it's about 25% blame Democrats, 75% blame Republicans, which is quite a change. We ran this maybe like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I can't remember exactly. And I think it was more 50-50, 60-40. It's interesting that people are blaming the Republicans over on Stereo, which is not the most liberal social audio app out there. But a little bit about the shutdown. Oh, Donna has requested to speak, so I'm going to approve you, Donna, and then I'm going to jump over to you after I finish this thought. Appreciate you. We'll hear from you in a moment. Now that the shutdown is dragging on, we mentioned this on the show several times already today. WIC was jeopardized. They used tariff money apparently to keep WIC going, but we're not sure what that's going to look like. Maybe we'll find out in November next month. But also food benefits, SNAP, EBT, that is ending. They're not going to issue that for November according to current standards. And so right now I'm sharing an article from CBSNews.com. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has posted a notice on its website saying federal food aid will not go out on November 1st, raising the stakes for families nationwide as the government shutdown drags on. The new notice comes after the Trump administration said it would not tap roughly $5 billion in contingency funds to keep benefits through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, commonly referred to as SNAP, flowing into November. That program helps about 1 in 8 Americans. 1 in 8 Americans buy groceries. So this is really a good demonstration of the Trump administration. They're using tariff money apparently. Maybe we'll find out more in November to keep WIC going, which is specifically for mothers, pregnant mothers, and their children to have benefits that include food as well as a bunch of other things. So they're keeping that going. But even though they have $5 billion in contingency funds that are designed to help keep programs going in a situation like this, they said they're not going to use it. This shutdown began on October 1st and is now the second longest on record. While the Republican administration took steps leading up to the shutdown to ensure SNAP benefits were paid this month of October, the cutoff in November would expand the impact of the impasse to a wider swath of Americans, and some of those most in need in this country. Unless a political resolution is found in just a few days, I don't think it will be. I think the Democrats are hurting people. And this is just another example of that. Now, you can say, well, the Democrats are hurting people. I'm a Democrat and I say that. But this is a decision by the Trump administration. And that's absolutely true. The Trump administration is deciding not to use $5 billion in contingency funding to keep food benefits going. The current administration, of course, though, blames Democrats, according to CBS News, who say they will not agree to reopen the government until Republicans negotiate with them on extending expiring subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. Republicans say Democrats first agree to reopen the government before those negotiations can begin. Democratic lawmakers have written to the Agriculture Secretary requesting that she use contingency funds to cover the bulk of next month's benefits. But a USDA memo that surfaced yesterday says contingency funds are not legally available to cover regular benefits. The document says the money is reserved for such things as helping people in disaster areas. So there's some crisscross. We're not sure exactly what's going on, but since the Trump government decided that they weren't going to use that money, it makes me think that it actually is available to be used. If it's not available to be used, they don't have to make a proclamation that they're not going to use it. I think that's logical. Some states have pledged to keep SNAP benefits flowing, even if the federal program halts payments. But there are questions about whether U.S. government directives may allow that to happen. So even if states want to pick up the check and pay for it, can they do that? The USDA memo also says states would not be reimbursed for temporarily picking up the cost. But states are telling SNAP recipients rather, to be ready for the benefits to stop. So shop now before the benefits go away. All right, so that was one piece of news I wanted to cover on today's show. Donna, you've been waiting patiently. You are a speaker. What are your thoughts about this or anything else we've covered? What's on your mind?
Hello, everybody. It's my first time in your space.
Donna, it says you are a speaker. Do you want to unmute yourself and say hello?
I am unmuted. Can you hear me? Hello?
Lee, if you can hear me, Donna is talking. So X is being X.
Yeah, we hear you. Yeah, great to have you for the first time. What's on your mind?
Drop down and come back up to speaker, and then he'll be able to hear you.
Okay.
I hear you both. You guys. So I could actually hear all of them, but I guess they could not hear me. So I just reset Twitter Spaces. I'm going to join in again and see if that fixed the problem. All right. Can you guys all hear me? I actually could hear Donna and I could hear everyone else, but I guess you could not hear me. Great. Okay. I got a thumbs up from Apostate Nate. So let's wait for Donna to come back.
Good. We're good now.
Yeah. Every once in a while, Elon Musk kicks us in the crotch. All right, so let's just wait for Donna to come back. In the meantime, let me think here. Was there anything else big that we should cover? Oh yeah, there was that jewel heist from the Louvre. They got like I think $100 million worth of stuff, but they think it'll be hard to sell, and if they just like melt it down and take it apart, it won't be worth as much. But still, that's embarrassing. Oh, and they have suspects in custody after a week-long manhunt over the Louvre theft. Ah, and Donna's back. All right, great. So yeah, Donna, I could actually hear you, and I could hear everyone else, but I guess you guys could not hear me. So I left Twitter and came back, and it seems to be working now. So I appreciate your patience. Twitter Spaces is awesome, but boy, does it suck from time to time, unfortunately. All right, Donna, you are a speaker again. First time on the show. Great to have you. What's on your mind?
Hey, well, hello, everybody. Um, yeah, I was just going to say two things. I was first going to talk about the ballroom and just mention one specific thing. It'll be nice to have that for all the world leaders, for leaders to be together. I think just it's going to help in a lot of ways. But the most important topic for me is about the SNAP. I seeing all the posts for myself because I am such deep compassion for people. I understand seeing the ones, where they're not working, they've been on it for a long time, they need to get a job, if they can work. But I just have compassion and the understanding that a lot of people don't know how SNAP works. They don't understand the people that are struggling, people that are disabled. I mean, you can't just rip it away. I mean, they're doing it, but you can't just rip it away and cause immediate emotional and physical suffering. If anything, at some point, they can give it a time frame to be on it. But the formula and the way they're operating SNAP, they're making it to where people have to work, So I'm just really sad about, I don't want to say I'm sad, I'm not sad, but I'm frustrated. I get really pissed, honestly, when I see so many just cruel people saying, oh, just rip it all away. Yeah, when there's people, millions that are disabled. So I really hope that President Trump doesn't allow it to happen, to not fund it. I really hope that somebody or something happens to where President Trump comes in and saves the day.
So that's a great perspective. Thank you for that. Do you think Trump is going to come in and save the day? Because the article I just read made it look like he actually was preventing that from happening.
Yeah, of course I don't know, but the fact that President Trump and the administration has not done anything to alleviate the distress, that in itself is just so wrong. I mean, I understand that, and I've been MAGA, okay, and I just heard that you're a Democrat. Um, but I have way more compassion than MAGA. And as of late, I'm not even really considering myself MAGA anymore. For me, I'm highly spiritual. Okay. I'm very, very, and I feel like I'm a merging of both sides because I do care about a lot of the things of MAGA, but I also have compassion and grace and enough anyway to care about the other side, you know? So I don't know if he's going to do anything, but it's just really, I just can't even begin how I feel about the food because people on here, especially MAGA has far less compassion than the Democrats. They just do, period. I mean, just Even though I've been on the side of MAGA,
I just
but
want to say
typically,
I appreciate the fact that yeah that's your team, but you're like willing to admit that because I'm a Democrat and my team is terrible in so many ways, but in other ways I think they're much better than the Republicans, and just being able to
uh-huh.
discuss that is really valuable, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually, it's nice actually to talk to you, who's a Democrat, who also said positive things when I first got on here, about Trump and the ballroom. So I am not like a typical MAGA. Like I said, I feel like I am a unity emerging of both sides. And it's because of my spirituality. I honor the life within everybody. I still stand up for truth and righteousness and what I believe is the right way. But at the same time, I would not ever, like countless MAGA people, I just, it's really triggering. And I have to really just get off and say, okay, I cannot respond anymore. Because to witness people bash people that are struggling, that are suffering, and wish them to rip away all EBT from everybody, like it's very typical. It's very typical of Republicans. Republican mindset is very negative in judgment. They don't know compassion because Republicans typically have not gone through major suffering. Okay. Now I have. I've gone through unimaginable suffering in my life. Okay. I've been homeless. I have been on EBT. I understand what it's like to lose everything and not have family, people, nobody to be there, but you've got, greedy, negative, judgmental Republicans and MAGAs. Oh, just get it. When you were in a car accident and you can barely walk. Okay. So I have compassion and I'm just in a real kind of a place where I'm just letting go of MAGA. I'm like, okay, I am not saying I'm with any side at this point because I cannot even associate myself with that level of cruelty. It's unbelievable. I wish, and I'm thinking today, I'm like, little old me, what can I do to help get people food? I'm like, what can I do? I don't know.
Really appreciate sharing your personal side of things, and I'm sorry you went through all that, but it's a good point to make. Like you said, maybe a lot of people who don't want to fund SNAP benefits during the government shutdown or increase funding of these sort of social programs that are way more prevalent in every other advanced nation than the United States haven't had these bad times. And I think sometimes that is a good line to draw, that you don't know what this is like. But I think actually, unfortunately, that's maybe not true as much as we might think, because Republicans, their general voting base is a lot of really poor and middle class conservative people, as well as a lot of really rich people. And if you look at a lot of the really red states, now America is not red state versus blue state. It's actually every metropolitan is basically blue, and everywhere else outside of the big cities is red. And just depending on how the state is made up in those ways, you have red states and you have blue states. So, for instance, Massachusetts is very liberal, but if you go different parts of the state, it's going to be very red. And Texas is very red, but Austin is very liberal. The major metropolitan areas are much more liberal than the rest of the state. So actually, I think it's more about compassion, like you were saying, is that I think a lot of people who vote Republican and vote Trump, they actually do have hard times and they just don't care. To be fair, that is America. We don't care about people as much as every other developed nation and even some developing poor nations. We just don't care. It's about personal responsibility. Get a job, figure it out, buy the bootstraps, make, the American dream. Unfortunately, the American dream for some time now isn't really what it used to be. It used to be back in the 50s and 60s, like, yeah, being better than your parents, having more economic, educational, all these opportunities was something that was actually happening. But we've talked about it on previous shows. I don't have the figures in front of me, but previous shows we've talked about how it's actually much more likely to achieve the American dream in Canada or the UK than it now is in the United States, because the amount of social problems, rather social programs that we have now, are not the same levels that they were many decades ago. And also, there are other factors like, in the 50s and 60s, pretty much anyone could afford to go to a college or university. And that's very different now than it was then. So it's changing, things that are changing, I should say, in the United States. So college is just much more expensive than it used to be. And also the fact that our social programs have not caught up, have not stayed current with the amount of need that has increased and increased and increased in the United States, and it wasn't at that level previously. Also, expectations are different. Back in the 50s, medical care was not advanced as it is now. So if you had through one program or the other in the 1950s that people had access to medical care even if they couldn't pay for it, as medical care is more advanced and more expensive now in the United States, you'd have to really increase your social programs in order to continue that same access. So there's a bunch of different things playing. But you mentioned maybe you don't want to be part of MAGA. Maybe you don't want to identify as that group or as a Republican anymore. Are you interested in coming to the dark side and being more of a Democrat if you care about things like food benefits and helping people who need that help in the United States?
Yeah, I loved everything that you said, and I agree. Um, to I think all of it. Now, I I don't consider myself Republican. I never have. I have considered myself a Democrat before, years ago. I have been a Republican in the past, but I have been in a place really for a while, but especially in the last many weeks, especially with everything going on with EBT and seeing the level of cruelty is just beyond. It's beyond that. I cannot I can't say that I'm a part of that. I'm just not affiliated and putting a title on who I am because I believe that, and I'll just maybe independent. Yeah, independent. I'm just independent and I believe transcendent over both parties because I agree with a lot of the right on things that I believe are integrity, and I agree with the Democrats with providing to support sacred life within people that are suffering. And that is the key for humanity, period. This is a call of our time. This is what we are experiencing right now, is what I wrote about in my first book called The Revelation. And it is a spiritual call in every single religion. And it's called tzedakah in Judaism. And it's called tzedakah, as a Muslim. It's called charity, in Catholic terms and also Christian. But Americans and Christianity, they do to a point, but they don't fulfill that. There's a lot of selfishness, a lot of negative judgment and greed and withholding. So it's ultimately selfishness and not being able to recognize the divine life, that sacred life that's within every human being, not just a Republican, but a Democrat too. And we've got to get to a point like in Judaism, they have belonging. You spoke on this, at least in different words. Judaism, they're there for one another. There's a belonging, it's strong because they teach in Judaism the spiritual value of tzedakah, which is living in charity, which means they are required as part of their religion to not just give tithe, but you give 10% charity of everything that you get. Not, it's ultimately to please the divine, the light, but it shows that you recognize sacredness in every human being and that we're here to alleviate the suffering that is upon that sacred life. So MAGA, they're treating the people as just negative people, right? They're not seeing the sacredness of the life that is within those people that are distressed right now. So they think they call themselves Christians. No, they don't know the divine. That's Protestant Christianity. They don't know the divine. I mean, some of them might, but the mass of Christianity, and I'm not talking about Catholicism, I believe they're closer to truth. But there is, and I'll land it here, there is a greater call for humanity for us to be there with one another, for one another in times of suffering like this, and not to cruelly neglect, abandon, mock, want cruelty, want suffering, because what these people, MAGA, don't know, the Republicans, they're mocking right now, they have no idea what's coming to them spiritually. It's karma. You cannot do that to a soul and not get paid back with suffering. So I know that, but I'm just kind of witnessing from a distance. But somehow, some way, the Republicans, they're going to suffer. It's coming because only through suffering do you know compassion. So a suffering has to come for Americans to wake up, to belong to one another, to be there for one another, to grant grace, forgiveness, and to love life beyond the suffering, to support that life and help heal our people.
That was awesome, Donna. Really appreciate you calling into the show for the first time. I hope you can follow the show over on Twitter Spaces, this account, and join us in the future. Yeah, like I said, it's a bit ironic because Americans really do suffer in ways that people in advanced nations around the world do not, and yet that still hasn't changed. I think the group mindset, the overall mentality that even if you're Christian or whatever it is, that okay, yeah, it's in the Bible. You should help each other. Help your fellow man. But still, like, individual responsibility. If you're homeless, it's your fault. If you're on food stamps, it's your fault. That sort of a thing. I know, broad brush here, but I think that's definitely a thing in the United States. And so, like you said, maybe it takes even more suffering. We have to be even more of an outlier in the developed world, for people to wake up. I'm a Democrat. I'm down with socialism. I don't like communism. I don't think they're the same thing at all. But if you look at every other advanced nation out there, they got a lot more socialism to varying degrees than we do. Looking at you, national healthcare, the only advanced nation without national healthcare, yet we pay more per capita from the government perspective for healthcare than any other nation, and we have the worst healthcare outcomes. So some of it's just logic. Like, we should have national health care because it's actually cheaper, and in most ways it works better. I say most ways because, okay, the American system, it's really expensive, but if you have the cash, the best health care in the world is right here in the good old USA, but most people don't fall into that category. I go back to Snap because you've been talking about Snap so much. I really appreciate that. I'm on ChatGPT. SNAP is a federal program funded by the U.S. government and overseen by the USDA, but it's administered by the states. So the rules are mostly federal, but you apply through your state's Human Services or Welfare Department. Eligibility depends on income, household size, and expenses. Generally, households must earn below 130% of the federal poverty line, which is about $3,250 per month for a family of four in 2025. You have to be a U.S. citizen or legal residence, though some mixed status households can qualify for partial benefits. And work requirements is a new component of this. That applies to some adults without dependents. They must work or be in a job program for at least 80 hours per month in most cases. This is something Republicans are really for. But once again, this is adults without dependents. So if you're a mother, a father, if you have kids, if you're disabled, there are exceptions even under the tightened restrictions from the current Republican Congress and Trump administration. We don't have paper food stamps anymore. Instead, recipients get an EBT card. It looks and works like a debit card. It does, but I've seen people have them in stores, and you can usually identify them if you're paying attention. Benefits are loaded once a month and can be used at most grocery stores, supermarkets, and farmers markets that accept SNAP. However, there are new restrictions that have been coming out of the woodwork in the last few years. So, groceries for home preparation like fruits, vegetables, meat, dairy, bread, cereal, and seeds or plants to grow food are allowed. Not allowed alcohol, tobacco, hot prepared meals, pet food, household items, or vitamins. And I think some states, is it Nebraska? And this has been talked about federally as well, have introduced you can't buy soda, you can't buy candy, and things that previously were allowed, but depending on your state, may or may not be allowed now. Okay, so that's SNAP. Every $1 in SNAP benefits generates about $1.5 to $1.8 in economic activity, according to USDA data. There is some fraud with SNAP, but it's heavily monitored. Fraud rates are very low, around 1%. So this is something a lot of Republicans, conservatives point to. It's not really a thing, but it is technically a thing. It's sort of like voter fraud. It's not really a thing. It doesn't affect elections. It never does, but it technically is a thing. And there have been some high profile cases as of late, but it's not something that actually affects elections. SNAP fraud is not something we really need to worry about, but technically it is a thing. So, in plain terms, SNAP is a debit card that helps poor families buy food as well as people with disabilities who are unable to work as much or at all, and they can receive some benefits. So that's SNAP. And as I previously mentioned a moment ago on the show, there's $5 billion in contingency funding that, in theory, could be used to continue funding these food SNAP benefits into this next month in November. The Trump administration has released a document saying that that money cannot be used. Therefore, SNAP will be shut down in November as long as the government shutdown continues, which looks like it will into November. There is some back and forth on whether or not that money should even be allowed to be used for SNAP. But my gut tells me, since the Trump administration specifically said you can't use that money, it could have been used. Why else would they have to say you can't use it? Some states are saying that they'll use their own funds to pay for SNAP into November, but they've been told that they will not be reimbursed because, once again, it's not supposed to be paid for. So, with all that coming out of the Trump administration, let's ask fake AI President Trump himself, why are you not using this $5 billion in contingency funding? It's literally to be used in a situation like this to have SNAP benefits continue into November for millions of Americans that need this food assistance.
The contingency funds for SNAP food benefits were originally intended to be used in case of a disaster or emergency. However, I believe that these funds should not be used for ongoing programs such as SNAP. I believe that the government should have enough funds to cover these programs without relying on emergency funds. I am working to find a solution to this issue, and I hope that the shutdown will be resolved soon.
And that's one thing that is true. I don't buy that this money is not supposed to be used in this way. I think if you pay attention to how it's being presented by both the media and the Trump administration, they're trying to stop it from being used, which would mean it could be used. But if the government shutdown does end, SNAP resumes. We don't have to use tariff funding to pay for WIC, which the Trump administration is doing. In theory, we'll have to see how that looks in November. We have yet to find out a lot of those details, but they are using that money to pay for WIC. They're not allowing other money that exists for this reason to pay for SNAP. But if the government shutdown ends, they don't have to worry about this, and all of these programs can be resumed, assuming that they're part of new spending proposals and stuff that would have to be passed to end the government funding. All that being said, as a Democrat, as Donna pointed out, she had some criticisms for MAGA, which she has identified with as in the past and maybe doesn't want to be a part of anymore. I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I 100% blame the Democrats for this shutdown. I don't think they're going to win, so the shutdown doesn't make any sense. And if you look at the votes, the Democrats are the stinkers. They are the minority that is stopping the majority in Congress from doing the funding bills that they want to do. You can disagree with Republicans, you can disagree with Democrats, whatever it is. I think those are facts. The Democrats are the stinkers holding this up, and if, in my opinion, this is an opinion for sure. I don't think they're going to win. Therefore, they're just hurting a lot of people. And this is unfortunate because this is a time when Democrats have not been able to win elections as of late. They have a really negative view from both Republicans and also Democrats like myself. I think my party is in shambles. I think they use too much effort on things that don't matter to most people, and they didn't focus on things that actually would get them elected in really important positions around the country, including the White House. Thanks a lot, Kamala Harris, who seems to want to blame everybody with her new book except for herself. So I would love for the government shutdown to be over. I think it's the Democrats' fault, but again, I don't predict that happening anytime soon. I apologize because we had someone who was waiting to speak over on Twitter Spaces, and I was just holding off to allow them to be a speaker. Once we finished up with Donna, and I gave my reply, they just dropped. But we're wrapping up the show anyways, so my apologies. But I just wanted to note that. Was there anything else I needed to get to on this? No, I think we're good. Andrew, you have your hand up, so let's go ahead and do final thoughts. So Donna, if you want to give us a final thought, Andrew, give us your final thought now. And then we did receive a tweet from Apostate Nate, who had to drop off from the show a little bit earlier. And his tweet has his final thoughts. So Andrew, back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that you mentioned that every dollar spent is $1.80 in economic activity, and that economic activity is farmers, suppliers, the entire food supply chain. Like the entire American food supply chain is subsidized by this SNAP program. So that is food that is not being moved through the supply chain, right? If it's not being bought and given to the people and subsidized for the people who need it. What's
It's
funny is
part. It's a
it
it's
like
a portion of
it
the
like
supply
a lot of
chain, but
people
it's
like
not
to
the entire
a lot of
food
people like to
industry.
frame it as taking care of poor people, but it's also taking care of the people who grow the food, who might have a little extra this time, and so they sell it at a discount into the system or whatever, for these people who need it. And then the government just facilitates the movement of American farmers growing food to hungry Americans that want the food, right? And it creates economic value in the supply chain. So if you cut that off, uh, that you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. You're pretending that, like, and I'm not saying you when but like the logic is that there are people who are taking advantage of the system or whatever. So let's put them into work programs or whatever. But the fact is, like, it's actually at the other end of the rope. You're actually helping farmers to keep the whole supply chain of American food alive. Do you see what I'm saying? Especially when, like, you have tariffs on exporting soybeans and all of the things right now. Um, it causes real problems for the farmers, and you could really have a negative effect on the American food supply chain with these actions that are happening. So that's kind of like the big picture macroeconomic side of things, right?
Yeah, I would agree with you that if people are across the country, millions of people buying food with SNAP benefits, and then all of a sudden that disappears, you could imagine reallocate their funds and take money away from other things in order to still buy food that we need to live, right? But I want to correct something. I'm on ChatGPT. Farmers and grocery stores don't discount prices for SNAP recipients. SNAP recipients pay the same prices as everyone else. The discount comes from who pays the bill. The government foots the cost through SNAP benefits, not the seller. So when someone uses an EBT card at a supermarket, farmer's market, etc., the person who sells them the goods get reimbursed the full retail price electronically by the government, exactly as if a credit card was used. So the seller doesn't lose any money on the transaction. Now, like you were saying, with farmers just benefiting from SNAP in general, but not because of a discount, absolutely. SNAP is effectively a demand booster for agricultural products because more people are buying them than in theory they would buy if they had to pay cash. Once again, people need food, but when you get SNAP benefits, you're probably buying hopefully as much food as you need, or you're buying better quality food, which usually is more expensive than very cheap food that you would get by with if your SNAP benefits were cut. So SNAP injects billions of dollars every year into the food economy, over 100 billion in 2024. That money flows straight to retailers, distributors, and farmers because people use it to buy actual food. Once again, bread, produce, dairy, meats, grains. Farmers markets that accept SNAP have seen measurable sales growth, especially since the program added incentives like double up food bucks, which doubles the value of SNAP dollars spent on fruits and vegetables. We've covered that in previous shows, but we did not cover that specifically today, so I'm glad we hit that point. So again, SNAP isn't a charity from farmers, it's a market guarantee that people can afford to buy their products. And you can imagine when SNAP goes away in November, less products will be purchased, which means less demand, which is not good for anybody in the whole chain of companies and farmers that we just described. So when the government shuts down and SNAP payments are delayed, demand drops, perishable goods pile up, but they're perishable, so they don't last forever. And small rural economies take a hit. SNAP spending is a huge part of grocery revenue in rural areas, sometimes 10 to 20% of total sales. And that ripple hits trucking, packaging, and farm income too. The USDA found that during the 2019 shutdown, when SNAP payments were delayed, grocery sales dropped significantly in low income zip codes. Economists estimate that every $1 billion in lost SNAP spending costs the economy around, once again, the same ratio, 1.5 to 1.8 billion in total activity. That translates into real financial pain for farmers, grocers, and workers along the food chain. So excellent point to bring up, Andrew. I appreciate that. It's an all negative sort of a thing, but we still need to know the details. And yes, this is going to hurt a lot of people, not just the people who are going to be eating these food items because of a program like SNAP, which is a limited social program in a country like the United States, as opposed to every other developed nation that has much more of this sort of a thing. On today's show and many other shows, it really does suck to be American once you take away whatever you feel about guns, take away the right to own guns, and sometimes some really, really destructive guns. Basically almost total free speech that we have in this country. It doesn't exist like this anywhere else, but I would hand in guns and free speech to the level we have here and accept whatever they have in all of our allied nations in Europe and Canada and Australia, because they take care of people in a way that we just don't do in the United States and have not done during our lifetimes. Let's jump over here to stereo. We have a couple more comments, and then I want to hear from Donna if she has a final comment, and then we'll wrap up the show really quick. Apostate Nate some time ago wrote, "Gotta drop. My hot take is this. I can't believe we spent 3 hours talking about a ballroom." Yeah, it hasn't been the entire conversation, but we've spent a long time today talking about the destruction of the East Wing of the White House and this supposed, you feel like they're going to build it, but they haven't done it yet, this new ballroom that seats 999 people. Let's hear from Auntie McItballs, and then we'll hear from Psych over on stereo.
Well, if so many Americans are suffering, why don't we take care of Americans first? Get them the help they need, get them up on their feet, get them housing, whatever it is that they need. Why don't we do that first instead of giving money to Israel, instead of giving money to Ukraine, instead of giving money to any other country? Why don't we take care of ours first, and then we can help them later? I mean, do you agree or do you not agree?
Yeah, I'm a Democrat. I'm a liberal person. I completely agree. We need to get our troops away from rich nations. We need to stop helping Ukraine. I believe Ukraine is the better country in that fight. Russia invaded Ukraine, and they were doing it before the beginning of this current conflict that we're focusing on. But Europe is rich. They have military assets. They need to put on the big boy, big girl pants. and take care of their friend in Ukraine. We need to stop doing it. We need to stop helping Israel, and we need to help Americans. American money for Americans. I 100% agree. Let's hear from Auntie Mickey Balls again.
Well, Lee, thank you for admitting that and saying that. I think that's the smartest thing I've ever heard you say. The one that makes the most sense. You recognize what the Democrats are doing and how they're holding up this, reopening the government, because that's what's really happening. These guys want so much money, for pork that's doesn't help us. They're all going to different countries that they're not going to help anybody. We need to concentrate on this country first, and then worry about other countries later once we get our situation fixed. But appreciate you for recognizing that and saying that out loud.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I mean, the Democrats are wrong with this government shutdown. They're not wrong about what they want. I support what they want. I don't think they're going to get it. And they're hurting a lot of people, I would say, unnecessarily in this government shutdown. And even if you forget all that, it's terrible for the Democrats right now. People are not happy with this shutdown. And I think your average person, if you ask them, would blame the Democrats more than the Republicans. Over on Stereo, actually, a poll right now, only about 30% blame the Democrats, which is really surprising to me. I did this poll a week or two ago, and it was about 50-50, and 70% are blaming Republicans. So this is unscientific. It's just anecdotal. But I think it's horrible optics, at the very least, for my team, the Democrats, to be causing this shutdown when they're not going to win. If I thought they were going to win, I would have a different viewpoint. I would say, okay, maybe the ends justify the means, but I don't think they're going to win. So just a bunch of people are getting hurt. But to be fair, Donald Trump is the one who's saying we can't use $5 billion in contingency funds that are designed for this to keep Snap going. So there is some blame to go around, but overall, I would blame the Democrats. And I'm happy to blame my own team because I think it's the right answer. And I appreciate Donna throwing MAGA under the bus for the reasons that she did, talking about a lack of caring for other people. I would agree with that as well, but I'm not a MAGA supporter, so it doesn't mean as much coming from me. So I appreciate her comments. Let's hear 2 comments from Psych, and then we'll get a final comment from Donna, and then we'll end the show. Really appreciate everybody. It's been great to have you. Let's hear from Psych on stage.
Hey, how's it going, Lee? Yeah, as somebody that is on Snap currently, the farmers markets are so much more expensive than a grocery store that even with the doubling, it makes no sense to go to a farmer's market. You don't get enough food. And it's only, $292 a month is the most a single person can qualify for. So that's not much. So you got to buy cheap and bulk when possible.
Is this another account from Worm Million? This sounds like Worm Million over on Stereo. Old friend of the show, if it is. But whatever the case, yeah, I appreciate the comment. I also was surprised. We've talked about SNAP food benefits before on the show many different times, how popular these local farmers markets were, because if I was on SNAP, I would also figure go to a big Walmart. I think you can use them at Costco if you buy the right products. So like go to a wholesaler. Now you'd have to have the Costco membership. But if you already have the Costco membership, yeah, buy in bulk. I would agree with you. I think the way this makes sense is that a lot of people who are on SNAP are not, if I don't have SNAP, I don't eat. And if I do have SNAP, I do eat. It's about allocating their money towards different things. And I think that's still useful. I think that's a legitimate reason to have SNAP. And so the reason I bring this up is because I can imagine people who have SNAP, they're getting, even though it's limited, more than they absolutely need. And if you have more SNAP benefits than you absolutely need, why not buy local? Why not buy fresh? And even with the doubling, like you mentioned, if it still doesn't equal shopping at Walmart or Costco, if you have more than you absolutely need, I can see why buying fresh and local makes sense. I am cheap, so I usually don't do that. I love Walmart. I love Costco. But if I had much more money than I do now, I can imagine going to farmers markets or buying organic and things like that that are more expensive. I am just a person who's never seen the value in that. I know sometimes it tastes better and it's better for you, but I would rather have the money. I am cheap as hell. So that's how I explain that inconsistency that you are 100% correct to point to. But I think that when you think about the context, it makes a little bit more sense. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And let's have our final comment on stereo. Then we'll hear from Donna for a final comment, and then we'll end the show. Let's hear from Psych again.
I'm just commenting on your last comment on Ukraine and Russia, and that Russia invaded Ukraine. Have you seen Oliver Stone's documentary called Ukraine on Fire about the lead up? So there was the Maidan coup. So the CIA and Victoria Nuland fomented a coup in Ukraine in 2014. So that's really the start of the current conflict.
I have not seen that. I admit I'm not the most knowledgeable about the Ukraine war or what happened before that because there's all that stuff with Crimea. Like, there's a lot of history there. I'm not sure what the point is you were trying to make, but I would just say overall, Ukraine versus Russia, I choose Ukraine every time. I know there's a lot of problems with Ukraine. They've had to like fire generals and stuff. There is a lot of not fraud, but there is a lot of blanking on the word here. Ukraine has a problem with transparency in some things, and it has basically fraud in the government. I'm blanking on the word I need to use here. And people have been fired and removed from posts throughout the war, pointing to those issues that I just mentioned. And Ukrainian troops have been accused, sometimes with very good evidence, of basically war crimes against Russian POWs. And of course, Russia has done terrible things as well. I don't have to explain that, hopefully. But that's any war. I mean, American troops that saved Europe in World War II and basically saved the world and then rebuilt Europe and many other parts of the world. We had atrocities in World War II. There are atrocities that have been confirmed and also reported with the Korean War and Vietnam and things like that. War is messy. It's never going to be good. A lot of innocent people are going to be killed. Plus, you just have the troops who are fighting who probably don't want to be there either. But I would choose Ukraine over Russia every single time, all that being the case. Just like with Russia and Gaza, Russia and Gaza, well, that'd be weird. Israel and Gaza, I err 100% on Israel. They are the only adult nation in the area. They're the only country you'd want to live in that area. There are so many values Americans share with Israel versus the other countries in that region of the world. That being said, a lot of people in Gaza were killed and didn't have to be killed. Israeli Defense Forces, as they're called, have committed so many mistakes, and like outright they were trying to do it anyways and then tried to say they weren't. All of that is true. And we can debate Israel Gaza, but I 100% side with Israel overall because they're the only adult nation in that area that you can trust most of the time. So I bring that up just because that's why I choose Ukraine. I think Ukraine is the clear better side there. And, for what it's worth, my heart goes out to them and everything they've had to suffer, but no more money for Ukraine. Ukraine is in Europe. Europe is really rich. No more money for Ukraine. Get the troops out of Germany, get the troops out of Japan. We have Marines in Australia. Get them out, bring them home. Even if that means downsizing the military, so be it. And use money for Americans who are suffering here. So thanks for those comments. All right, Donna, you're with us over on Twitter Spaces. If you want to give us a final comment, and Apostate Nate is back, but I think he's just a listener. I read your tweet, Apostate Nate. I can't believe we talked that much about the ballroom either. Donna, give me your final thoughts and we'll wrap up the show.
Yes. Just what you said, to take care of Americans that are suffering. When there is a will, there is a way. There hasn't been a will in America to care for all of the people who suffer. the over 700,000 people that are homeless, that have needed safety and security and love and support, all of the millions of Americans that are in distress emotionally and physically, that causes crisis. It causes emotional and physical damage. Listen, I know personally. And so I'm going to compare Israel to America. In Israel, 4% of Israelis are homeless. 4%. In America, 23% of Americans are homeless. That is insanity. It's because we don't, it's a spiritual immaturity. It's selfishness, it's greed, it's selfishness. But in Judaism, they teach charity and love and belonging because the Jewish people have gone through so much suffering that through that it creates bonding and belonging. So suffering is going to happen with America because only through suffering are people going to finally recognize the divine within every human being. But I also wanted to add, because there was a guy that just came on and said that he was on EBT. I am on EBT right now. I said earlier I was because there's a level of shame, but I have to be honest. I am on EBT because I want to be transparent. I have gone through my own personal with many things that have happened, and I have federally declared disabilities. Okay. I have trouble physically functioning. And so right now and for a while, that is what I get. Now, I'm going to give y'all an example. And for all the MAGA people, anybody that's listening, I started receiving $900, 900 and something dollars for SSI disability because that's all I get. And and I'm not working, y'all. I have music royalties because I've been a recording artist that come in. So my income is almost $1,000 a month. SNAP only approves me, someone that's federally declared disabled. I can't even afford to keep a roof over my head. I've been dealing with houselessness, and SNAP only gives me $124 a month. It's insanity. So I don't know how all these other people are getting so much when I literally just left a shelter 2.5 weeks ago. So so people have a misconception, and I think there's also people that are lying, saying, "Oh, I get 4,000 a month." You can't. SNAP doesn't pay that much. So I think there's a lot of people saying things just to trigger people. But I wanted to share my personal because I want to let go of any shame and I want to be transparent and say, listen, I have been a public speaker. I've been a recording artist. I've dedicated my life personally and professionally to ministry, but I've also struggled. I've been in a car accident. I've gone through so much personally with no family. And I know what it's like to be homeless, to go days without food. Y'all, I've gone days with no food, in crisis, crying, no one there to help. So, you want to know why I'm triggered? I've been there. I've been hungry. I've witnessed me reaching out to countless people, churches, and no one give a rat's butt if I literally survive and live. And so, the last thing I want to say is to say, heed a call where all of us can truly care. Think about the literal distress and crisis that people that could what they could be going through, and ask ourselves, what can I do? What can I do to alleviate someone's suffering that's closest to me? So that's it.
Well put, Donna. And once again, I appreciate the personal anecdotes, letting us know what your situation is. I know it's not easy to say those things, as you pointed out, but it's very powerful. and it really helps the discussion. So now we know the comments that you have given throughout the entire show are from the situation you have found yourself in, and I think that's really powerful. So thank you very much. One quick thing I want to correct. I think it was just a slip. On a single night in January 2024, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development accounted approximately 771,480 people experiencing homelessness in the U.S. You say experiencing homelessness because it's 2025 and you don't want to get canceled. That translates to about 23 people per 10,000 U.S. residents, or 0.23% of the population. So not 23%. 0.23. There's a big difference there, so I just wanted to point that out. But over a lifetime, so having ever been homeless, older research estimated about 7.4% of Americans had experienced literal homelessness in their lifetime. So that's, of course, higher because it's not at any current time. It is over someone's lifetime. And it says literal homelessness because, there's all kinds of stuff. I'm staying with friends. I'm sleeping in my car. Literal homelessness. So I assume that would mean they're like out on the street rather than staying with friends and family because they have nowhere to go. And once again, the 0.23% figure is a point in time counts. It captures only those encountered on a single night of the survey, not everyone who becomes homeless over the course of a year. So if you said people who were homeless over the course of a year, it would clearly be bigger than 0.23% of the population. There's more here, but I'll just leave it at that. So big thanks to everybody who's been a part of today's show. If you like the show, please subscribe, follow wherever you're listening or also watching, because I do a video simulcast. And if you have any question about those links, bit.ly, bit.ly/NEWZ debate has all my different links, including my Patreon account, patreon.com/NEWZ debate. If you have a little bit of extra money and you like the content that I produce, I would absolutely be appreciative of a little walking around money every month. I do the show because I like it. I do the show because I value the conversations, but also it feels really good to be rewarded for producing content. And I want to give a shout out to all my Patreon supporters, Better Vibes, Apostate Nate, Lola, Shannon, Sneaky Elbow, MC Funk, and Bjorn, and other people at patreon.com/NEWZ debate. That's going to do it. Hope you guys can join me for my next show. I post upcoming shows on Twitter as well as my Discord server. You can join my Discord server for free by going to bit.ly/NEWZ debate. That's going to do it. Have a great rest of your weekend. And until next time, bye-bye.